Elon Musk stared at the subject line of the email. It read, "A 5-year-old girl has cracked the code to solve humanity's energy crisis." He rubbed his eyes, unsure if he was reading it correctly. The inbox in front of him, usually filled with business proposals, news updates, and technical data, seemed to shimmer with something different. His curiosity piqued. He clicked open the message. The email was short, almost cryptic, and came from an address he didn't recognize. The content was as follows. "Dear Mr. Musk, I am writing to inform you of an extraordinary discovery made by my daughter, Emily. She is 5 years old, and her ability to solve problems related to energy is beyond anything we could have ever imagined. She has a theory that we believe could change the world. We would be honored if you could meet her and see for yourself. Please let us know if you are available for a visit. Best regards, Jonathan Hayes, lead scientist, Green Horizons Foundation." Elon leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. A 5-year-old? He chuckled at the absurdity of it. Was this some sort of prank? A gimmick to grab his attention? Or perhaps a serious inquiry that had somehow gone awry? But then, the part that caught his attention. Solve humanity's energy crisis. His thoughts shifted. If there was even the slightest possibility that this was legitimate, that a child had stumbled upon something monumental, he couldn't ignore it. It could be a hoax, but then again, it could be the breakthrough he'd been tirelessly working toward. The world needed an answer to energy. He'd been pushing Tesla to new heights, running SpaceX, and working on innovations that could push humanity into the future. Still, the energy problem, what the world would need to transition to a sustainable future, remained unsolved. He quickly scanned the message again, the name, Emily, echoing in his mind. What if this is real? Elon's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Without wasting any more time, he typed out a response. "Dear Mr. Hayes, I'm intrigued by your message. Please arrange a meeting. I'll be available in 2 days, at your earliest convenience. Best regards, Elon Musk." He hit send, leaned back in his chair, and exhaled deeply. It was a long shot, but it was worth checking out. 2 days later, Elon found himself stepping out of a sleek black Tesla in front of a modest building tucked away in a quiet suburban town. The Green Horizons Foundation's office was nothing like the sprawling, high-tech campuses he was accustomed to, and there was a certain charm to it. The building, a simple 2-story structure with large windows, looked unassuming, too unassuming, almost. He was greeted by Jonathan Hayes, a middle-aged man with glasses and a disarming smile. Hayes led Elon through a narrow hallway adorned with scientific posters and equations scribbled on white boards, until they reached a small, nondescript room. Inside, sitting at a table covered with papers and notebooks, was Emily. At first glance, she looked like any other 5-year-old, a child with wide eyes, an untamed head of brown hair, and a small, quiet smile. But there was something unusual about her demeanor. While most children her age would have been playing with toys or fidgeting nervously, Emily was focused, almost intently, on a piece of paper in front of her, her small fingers gently tapping the pen as she scribbled something down. Jonathan smiled and gestured for Elon to sit across from her. "Elon, this is my daughter, Emily." Emily looked up, her eyes locking onto Elon's with a gaze that felt older than her years. She gave him a polite nod and then returned to her paper, continuing to write. Elon cleared his throat, unsure of how to approach the situation. He'd met many brilliant minds in his life, but never a child. He wasn't quite sure what to expect. "So, Emily," he began, trying to break the ice, "I hear you've been working on something important." Emily didn't look up this time. Instead, she pushed the piece of paper toward him. Elon leaned in, curious. What he saw shocked him. On the paper were complex equations, symbols he recognized but hadn't seen in years, things that were well beyond what any typical 5-year-old should know. There was a series of equations that, at first glance, seemed to be a combination of energy principles and thermodynamics. Elon blinked. He wasn't sure if he was misreading it. "Is this yours?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Emily nodded, still not looking up. "Yes," she said softly. "It's a formula for creating an energy source that doesn't deplete or harm anything. It's clean energy. It doesn't use fossil fuels." Elon's mind was racing now. He glanced at Jonathan, whose proud smile didn't quite match the disbelief Elon felt. "Emily, can you explain it to me?" Elon asked, still trying to process what was happening. The little girl put down her pen, finally meeting his eyes. "Well," she began, "I noticed that the way people make energy right now is broken. It's like a machine that keeps eating its own food and then runs out. But if we stop it from eating the food, then we don't need more. We can make energy from something else, something that doesn't run out." Elon felt a twinge of something strange. Was it hope? Or was it fear? He had spent years trying to figure out how to create a sustainable energy solution, but Emily had just seen it. He couldn't explain how or why, but it made sense in a way he couldn't yet fully grasp. "Do you mind if I look at your work more closely?" Elon asked, a spark of excitement creeping into his voice. Emily nodded. "You can take it with you if you want, but you have to make sure no one else copies it. It's mine." Elon smiled, albeit a little awkwardly. He had dealt with genius minds before, but never one quite like this. "I promise," he said. He picked up the paper, holding it carefully as if it were fragile. As he turned to leave the room, Jonathan clapped him on the back. "I know it's a lot to process, but we really think she's onto something. I hope you can help us figure it out." Elon looked down at the equations again, then back to Emily. There was something in her eyes, a quiet confidence, that made him wonder if she truly had the answer to a problem that had eluded mankind for centuries. What if this was real? What if the future of energy wasn't in the hands of scientists and engineers, but in the hands of a 5-year-old girl? He stepped out of the room and into the waiting car, his thoughts spinning. The world could change with this. But first, I need to figure out if she's right. As the Tesla drove away, Elon could hardly contain the excitement bubbling inside him. There was something about Emily, something in the simplicity of her vision that made it seem almost too easy. Could she really have cracked the code to energy? Elon didn't know the answer yet, but he was about to find out. Elon spent the next few days consumed by Emily's theory. At first, the equations seemed almost too simple to be real, but the more he looked at them, the more they made sense. They weren't the elaborate formulas he'd expected, the ones filled with complex variables and heavy math. No, these equations were elegant, deceptively simple. It was as if Emily had somehow found a shortcut to an answer that had eluded generations of scientists. When he arrived back at his office in California, the first thing he did was call his top engineers and physicists to a meeting. He laid the equations on the table before them. "This is from a 5-year-old, he said, his voice tight with disbelief. "I need you to look at this like you would any other scientific breakthrough. Don't dismiss it just because of who it came from." The engineers exchanged skeptical glances, but they had learned not to question Elon's instincts. They got to work immediately, analyzing the equations, running simulations, and cross-referencing the principles with existing energy models. Elon's mind raced with possibilities. Could it be true? Could this little girl's idea actually change the way the world produced and consumed energy? But despite their best efforts, they didn't have the answer. Emily's equations worked in theory, but no one could figure out how to apply them to real-world applications. There were gaps in understanding, pieces of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. The deeper Elon dug into it, the more questions arose. The next week, Elon made another trip to the Green Horizons Foundation. This time, he wasn't just a curious observer. He was there to learn, to dig deeper, and to understand. As he entered the small, quiet research center, he noticed a stark difference from the first time he'd been there. The place had an almost calm energy to it, one that seemed to hum with quiet focus. The walls were lined with chalkboards and whiteboards covered with Emily's equations, but there were no frantic discussions or chaotic brainstorming sessions. Jonathan Hayes greeted Elon warmly as he stepped inside. "Glad to have you back, Mr. Musk. Emily's been looking forward to seeing you again." Elon followed him down the hall, his footsteps echoing in the stillness of the building. They came to a door, and Jonathan knocked lightly before pushing it open. Inside, Emily sat at the same table, scribbling furiously on a sheet of paper, her brow furrowed in concentration. The room had a comforting messiness to it. Piles of books, half-assembled models, and various drawings strewn about. It felt like a place where ideas were born, where the chaos of genius could take form. "Emily," Jonathan said softly, "Mr. Musk is here." Emily looked up, her large brown eyes locking onto Elon's as she gave him a small, reserved smile. "Hello again," she said politely, setting her pen down and pushing the sheet of paper aside. Elon smiled, although there was a knot in his stomach. He'd never been one to feel unsure about his intelligence or ability to understand complex problems, but sitting across from Emily, it felt like he was a student again, ready to learn. "Hi, Emily," he said, walking over to her. "I've been looking at your work, and I'm impressed. But, I'll be honest, there are some things I don't fully understand. Maybe you could explain it to me?" Emily tilted her head, as if processing the request, then nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice soft but confident. "I'll show you." She took another sheet of paper and began drawing, her small hand moving with surprising precision. As she sketched, she explained the basic concept behind her theory. The energy problem, she said, wasn't just about finding new sources of power. It was about rethinking how we used energy in the first place. "The way people make energy now is like having a bucket with holes," Emily explained. "Every time you try to fill it, some of it leaks out. And the more you try to fix the holes, the more complicated it gets, and the more energy you lose." Elon nodded, listening carefully. It was a simple analogy, but it made sense. It was an approach that he himself had taken when developing Tesla's batteries. Focus on efficiency, make the system as simple as possible. Emily continued, "What I think is that we're using too much energy just to make more energy. But if we use energy that's already everywhere, like light or gravity, or even the Earth's own movement, we could create energy without needing to keep making more." Elon was taken aback. This wasn't just some theory based on established science. It was something new, a completely different way of thinking about the problem. He had spent years working on renewable energy, solar, wind, and electric cars. But Emily's approach? It was radical, almost childishly simple in its elegance. As she spoke, she drew diagrams on the paper, outlining how her system would work. It wasn't just about harnessing sunlight or wind. It was about tapping into natural forces and converting them into usable energy with minimal waste. But as Elon listened, a sinking feeling crept over him. The simplicity of her theory was beautiful, but it was also dangerous. Could something so young and untested really work on a global scale? Could a 5-year-old have figured out something that scientists had spent centuries trying to solve? He looked up from the papers to Emily, who was watching him closely. "How did you come up with this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily shrugged, a small, almost playful smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I don't know. I just thought about how things work, like how trees grow or how water moves, and I thought, maybe we can do it like that too. Simple." There was a brief silence, and then Jonathan spoke up. "It's been hard for us to wrap our heads around it. Emily's ideas are brilliant, but we don't know how to implement them just yet. We've been trying to get them to work with current technology, but it's like we're missing something. That's why we reached out to you. We need someone who can think outside the box, someone who's done things others thought were impossible." Elon glanced between the two of them. He'd been skeptical at first, but now he wasn't so sure. There was a spark in Emily's eyes, a kind of certainty that he hadn't seen in any adult scientist. He took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, I'm in. Let's see if we can figure this out." Emily's eyes lit up with a quiet excitement. She wasn't just a child anymore. She was a visionary, and Elon realized that he might just be on the brink of the most important breakthrough of his career. As they began to discuss the next steps, Elon couldn't help but feel a shift, a new energy that seemed to come not from his own expertise, but from the pure, untainted mind of a 5-year-old girl who saw the world not for what it was, but for what it could become. Over the next few weeks, Elon Musk's life became a whirlwind of meetings, late-night brainstorming sessions, and rapid-fire emails. But this time, the work wasn't centered on SpaceX missions or Tesla innovations. It was all about Emily's theory, the little girl who had dared to imagine a new kind of energy, a sustainable, self-sustaining power source that could change the world. Elon quickly assembled a team of the brightest engineers and scientists he knew, many of them from Tesla, some from SpaceX, and even a few outside collaborators from universities. His orders were simple: drop everything else. Emily's theory came first. And yet, despite all of his resources and the brilliance of his team, there was still something hauntingly elusive about Emily's equations. They worked on paper. They made sense in theory. But when it came to real-world applications, they were like a puzzle missing too many pieces. Emily's presence at the Green Horizons Foundation was a steady reminder of just how far out of reach they all were. The young girl didn't sit in on the technical meetings, nor did she get involved in the complicated calculations and simulations that followed. But whenever Elon felt lost or frustrated, he would walk over to her, sitting at the same small table, drawing out diagrams and ideas, her pencil moving with a precision that belied her age. One morning, after several long hours of fruitless discussion, Elon found himself in front of Emily again. She was seated at the same table, flipping through a thick notebook of sketches and notes. Her brow furrowed as she studied something, and for the first time, Elon could sense that she was deep in thought. "Emily," he began, sitting across from her, "can you walk me through this again? I feel like we're missing something fundamental." The little girl didn't look up from her work. She simply pushed the notebook toward him, her small finger pointing to a set of complex-looking equations. "Look here," she said, her voice steady. "This is the part where you're trying to make the energy, right? But you're using things that need a lot of energy to start with. Like, you're putting energy into the system just to get it going. That's the problem." Elon stared at the equations. His mind raced, trying to connect the dots. It was true. The models they'd been using were all based on a premise that energy had to come from something else: solar panels, wind turbines, or batteries. But Emily's approach, as simple as it seemed, was telling them to rethink that process entirely. "So, you're saying we need a system that doesn't rely on an initial energy input?" Elon asked, his voice tentative. Emily nodded. "Exactly. Like how plants don't need to be powered by a battery to grow. They use sunlight and water, and that's enough. We just need to figure out how to make energy like that. Something natural that doesn't need a lot of help." It was a revelation, simple yet profound. The idea of creating a self-sustaining energy system that wasn't reliant on constant input was a concept that many scientists had tried to explore for decades. But the way Emily described it, the way she saw it, was like the missing link, the piece that could complete the puzzle. Elon felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. "Okay," he said, taking a deep breath. "Let's try this. But we're going to need to break it down even further. If we're talking about a self-sustaining system, we need to figure out where the energy is coming from and how to store it in a way that doesn't rely on the grid or any external sources." Emily smiled at him, as if this were the easiest thing in the world. "You already know how. You just have to think differently. You know how the earth moves, how the tides come in and out, the wind? Those things are already making energy all the time. We just need to tap into them." Elon's mind was already whirring. The Earth's natural forces, gravity, tidal movements, geothermal energy, and wind, had been sources of power for millennia, but no one had yet figured out how to harness them in a simple, efficient way. Could it really be that Emily had the answer? Could she have stumbled upon a way to create energy from the natural forces that surrounded them, with no depletion, no waste? Over the following weeks, the team worked tirelessly, guided by Emily's theory and Elon's unrelenting drive. They tested simulations, designed prototypes, and ran countless calculations, but nothing seemed to match the elegance of Emily's vision. The equations remained frustratingly out of reach. It was during one of these late nights, in the midst of a heated discussion about energy transfer and sustainable storage, that a breakthrough came. "Wait," one of Elon's senior engineers, Maya, said, looking up from her computer screen. "What if we stop thinking about energy as something to store and instead think about it as something to connect? What if we use the Earth's magnetic field as a bridge?" The room fell silent as everyone turned to Maya. She continued, "We've been trying to store energy, to keep it in one place for when we need it. But maybe we don't need to store it at all. Maybe we just need to find a way to connect to existing energy fields, like how Tesla envisioned wireless energy transfer, but applied to nature itself." It was a moment of clarity for everyone in the room. For the first time, They were no longer just chasing after a theory. They were building something tangible, something that could actually work. Elon turned to Emily, who had been quietly observing. Her wide eyes shone with that same quiet confidence. "That's it, isn't it?" he asked her. "You wanted us to connect to what's already there. Use the natural energy around us, instead of creating something new from scratch." Emily nodded slowly. "Yes. Like, the way a tree doesn't have to build its roots every day. It just is, and everything it needs is already there. It just takes what it needs." In the weeks that followed, the team began constructing a prototype, a system that could tap into natural energy sources and convert them into usable power. They combined electromagnetic fields, energy resonance, and environmental forces to create a device that could connect to the planet's natural energy grid without draining it. As the first prototype came together, there was a palpable sense of excitement in the air. They were no longer just chasing a dream. They were on the verge of something revolutionary, something that could change the world. But even as they celebrated their progress, Elon knew there was still much to be done. The real test was just beginning. Would this technology actually work in the real world? Could they refine it enough to scale it up and bring it to the masses? And most importantly, would Emily's incredible vision become a reality, or would it all fall apart? There was only one way to find out. The days leading up to the first test of the prototype were filled with anticipation. Elon Musk and his team at Tesla had made incredible strides, but now they stood on the edge of the unknown. Could the device they had been working on really tap into the Earth's natural energy? Could they prove that Emily's vision wasn't just childlike fantasy, but a solution to one of humanity's most pressing issues? Elon spent sleepless nights reviewing the plans, double-checking the calculations, and consulting with his engineers. The energy device, still unnamed, was unlike anything the world had ever seen. It had no need for batteries, solar panels, or wind turbines. It didn't rely on any conventional methods of generating power. Instead, it sought to tap directly into the Earth's natural electromagnetic fields, resonating with the planet's own energy to create a sustainable power source. Theoretically, it would generate power indefinitely without any external input, like a perpetual motion machine, but without the laws of physics being violated. But, of course, theories were one thing. Practical application was another entirely. The test was scheduled for the following Saturday. It would take place in a remote location, a vast, empty stretch of land on the outskirts of California, far from any power grids or urban infrastructure. The team wanted to eliminate as many external variables as possible. Emily would be there, as would Elon, along with his most trusted engineers. The world wasn't yet ready to know what was at stake, but if the test succeeded, they knew the implications could be world-changing. The morning of the test, the sky was cloudless and bright. The air was crisp, filled with the promise of something new. Elon stood near the prototype, a large, cylindrical structure that seemed almost too simple for its purpose. It was perched on the ground, surrounded by cables, sensors, and various pieces of high-tech equipment. At first glance, it looked like something you might see at a science fair, a crude model of an ambitious idea, but Elon knew better. Every wire, every sensor had been carefully placed. It was, in essence, the culmination of years of work. Emily stood nearby, her hands in her pockets, watching everything with calm, steady eyes. She wasn't excited like the rest of the team. She wasn't nervous. She was simply there, as if she already knew how the world would unfold. "Are you ready?" Elon asked her, walking over. Emily nodded, her expression serene. "It'll work," she said simply, her voice quiet but full of certainty. Elon wasn't sure whether it was confidence or something else, something unspoken, that gave him a sense of unease. He had learned over the years not to trust certainty too easily. Even the most brilliant minds were wrong from time to time. But Emily had been right about everything so far. His engineers were finishing their last checks, calibrating the sensors and setting up the monitoring equipment. Once the device was activated, they would be able to track the flow of energy, analyze its efficiency, and measure its output. If it worked, it would be a new era for humanity. If it didn't, well, Elon didn't want to think about that. "All right," Elon said, taking a deep breath. "Let's do this." The switch was flipped. At first, nothing happened. The air felt still, the world seemingly holding its breath. The team stood around the prototype, watching intently as the lights on the monitoring equipment blinked on, then off. The data began to flow, slowly at first. The readings were erratic, unstable. Elon's heart pounded in his chest. "Is it working?" one of the engineers, Maya, asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Elon glanced at the monitors. The output was low, barely registering his energy at all. He felt his stomach drop. Maybe it's too soon. He glanced at Emily, whose eyes were fixed on the device. Emily didn't look worried. She was simply waiting. "I think we need to recalibrate," one of the engineers said, as he fiddled with the control panel. "We're not getting a consistent signal." But before Elon could say anything, Emily spoke. "It's working," she said, her voice calm and confident. The team turned to her in surprise. "What do you mean?" Elon asked. "The readings are off the charts." "It's not about the numbers," Emily explained softly. "It's about the connection. We just need to let it settle." Elon furrowed his brow. What was she talking about? Let it settle? But then, something strange happened. As they all watched the device, a low hum began to emanate from it. The hum was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but soon it grew louder, vibrating the air around them. The readings on the monitors began to stabilize. Slowly, steadily, the energy output began to climb. Maya's eyes widened. "It's working. It's actually working." The prototype was generating power. The numbers weren't just registering. They were climbing higher, surpassing the output of conventional energy sources without any input. Elon couldn't believe his eyes. The device was functioning in a way no one could have predicted. It wasn't just generating energy, it was tapping into something far more profound, something elemental. The idea that energy could flow from the Earth itself, without any human intervention or fossil fuels, it was becoming real before his eyes. "Wait a minute," one of the engineers, Jared, exclaimed. "The energy is increasing. It's not just staying steady, it's growing." Everyone turned to look at the device. The numbers were indeed rising, steadily, as though it was gathering momentum with each passing second. This can't be right," Elon murmured. "It's too good to be true." "I told you it would work," Emily said, a small, satisfied smile forming on her lips. As the test continued, the device's energy output grew, surpassing even the most optimistic projections. The prototype was no longer just an experiment. It was proof that Emily's theory was not only possible, but it could fundamentally change the way energy was understood. The team watched in awe as the readings stabilized, the hum of the device becoming a soft, steady vibration. They'd done it. They had created something that, for all intents and purposes, seemed impossible. The future of energy wasn't some distant dream anymore. It was here. But as Elon stood there, watching the numbers climb higher and higher, a nagging feeling tugged at him. It was as if everything he had believed about energy, about technology, had been turned upside down. If this device worked, truly worked, what did that mean for the world? For Tesla? For the entire energy industry? Could the world handle this kind of revolution? Could they transition to a new form of energy without causing chaos, upheaval, and resistance from powerful industries that would stand to lose everything? He looked down at Emily, who was watching the device with quiet satisfaction. The world had changed, and he wasn't sure if anyone was ready for what came next. The first test had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Elon Musk stood at the center of it all, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. The device, the Earth-powered energy prototype, was no longer a distant dream or an ambitious experiment. It was real, and it was working. The world, however, had no idea what was coming. Back at Tesla's headquarters, the team scrambled to document the results, refine the prototype, and start planning the next phase, scaling the technology for broader use. For Elon, there was an urgency to the work. This breakthrough had the potential to change everything, the way energy was produced, consumed, and distributed. It could mean the end of fossil fuels, the end of reliance on conventional power grids. It could save the planet from the ravages of climate change. But there was also a darker realization. The disruption caused by such a breakthrough could be catastrophic. It wasn't just an opportunity, it was a ticking time bomb. While the Tesla engineers worked around the clock, Elon spent his nights drafting plans for the next stage. His mind buzzed with possibilities. Emily's theory was so simple, so elegant in its design, yet so powerful in its implications. If this technology became widely available, the world's energy landscape would shift overnight. The traditional energy industry would fight back, and governments might resist the transition. There was a delicate balance between releasing this technology to the public and ensuring it didn't get buried under political pressure or corporate greed. 2 days after the successful test, Elon called a meeting with his top advisors and key members of the Tesla leadership team. They gathered in a sleek, glass-walled conference room, overlooking the sprawling campus. The walls were adorned with whiteboards, filled with equations, charts, and sketches of the prototype. The air was thick with tension. "I want you all to understand the significance of what we've done," Elon began, his voice firm, but not without a hint of concern. "The device we tested, it's not just an energy generator. It's the future of the planet. It could solve every major energy crisis on Earth. But we need to be strategic. We can't rush into this blindly." Maya, the lead engineer who had been working closely with the prototype, spoke first. The test results were clear. The energy output isn't just steady, it's growing. It's harnessing natural forces, tapping into the Earth's magnetic fields and gravity. "This is a breakthrough, Elon. If we refine the technology, we can scale it up." "I agree," said Jonathan Hayes, one of Elon's longtime collaborators. "But think about the implications. If we deploy this technology, the world as we know it will change. The energy sector, the oil companies, the gas industries, they'll fight this with everything they've got. The question is, are we prepared for the kind of resistance we'll face?" Elon exhaled, looking out the window at the distant horizon. He had been preparing for this moment for years, but now that it was here, the gravity of the situation was more overwhelming than he had anticipated. "I'm prepared," he said finally, "but we have to be smart. This isn't just about energy, it's about how we change the world. If we're going to do this, we need to control the narrative. We can't just throw this into the public and hope for the best. We have to take the initiative." The room fell silent for a moment as everyone absorbed the weight of his words. Elon continued, "I want to start a controlled rollout. We'll begin by working with governments, research institutions, and select industries to refine and implement the technology. We'll keep it under wraps for now, make sure it's fully functional before going public. If we push too hard, too fast, we risk setting the wrong narrative, and the entire thing could be buried before it ever has a chance to take off." Maya nodded. "It makes sense. We need to prove the system works before we can scale it. But once we do, if this takes off, it could be the end of everything we know about energy production." Elon's expression grew more serious. "That's exactly why we need to be careful. We don't just need a working system. We need to show the world that this is the future and that it's in their best interest to embrace it." As the meeting wrapped up, Elon's thoughts lingered on Emily. The young girl who had sparked this entire revolution seemed strangely distant in his mind. She had given them the key, but now the real work began. He couldn't help but wonder, was she fully aware of what she had unleashed? Or was she simply a child, blissfully unaware of the scale of what she had done? Emily, for her part, had returned to the Green Horizons Foundation after the test. She had been content to watch the adults scramble, watching them with a quiet, almost amused curiosity as they tried to understand her theory. She knew, deep down, that they would figure it out. It wasn't hard for them. It was just a matter of time. What she hadn't expected, though, was how quickly it had all come together. She had hoped the prototype would work, but seeing it in action, watching the energy readings climb higher and higher, had been exhilarating. She spent her days at the foundation, drawing new equations, testing ideas, and answering questions from the engineers. But she had a feeling, deep in her gut, that things were about to change in a big way. The adults had the technology now, but the real challenge wasn't about making it work. It was about what they would do with it. One afternoon, as she sat in a corner of the Foundation's main research lab, Emily looked up at Jonathan Hayes, who had been her main point of contact with Elon's team. He was pacing, talking to one of the engineers, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Jonathan," Emily called out, interrupting him. He turned, giving her a warm smile. What's up, kiddo? I don't think it's going to be that easy, Emily said, her voice quiet but determined. Jonathan looked puzzled. What do you mean? Emily tilted her head slightly. I mean, everyone's talking about how this is going to change the world, but they don't know how hard it's going to be. You can't just give people something like this and expect them to take it. Some of them are going to be scared. Some people are going to fight it. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. You're right, but we're not going to let that stop us. Emily nodded, then added softly, just make sure you're ready for when it gets hard. Jonathan smiled, a little surprised by her insight. I'll take that advice. As he turned to leave, Emily returned to her drawings. There were still so many questions, so many things yet to be figured out. She wasn't worried about the technology. What worried her more was how the world would handle it. And deep inside, she knew that no matter how much progress they made, the real challenge had only just begun. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and media prep. Elon Musk had known from the moment the prototype succeeded that this kind of breakthrough would attract attention, but he had underestimated just how quickly things would escalate. Elon, Maya, and the rest of the team worked tirelessly to refine the prototype, tweaking the energy resonance systems, testing the device under different environmental conditions, and running simulations that tried to predict the device's potential long-term impact on global energy networks. All the while, they kept their work under wraps, keeping the technology as confidential as possible. But despite their best efforts, whispers began to spread. Elon Musk was no stranger to controversy. After all, he had revolutionized the electric car industry and was working toward human colonization of Mars. But this was something entirely different. People were starting to take notice, not just in Silicon Valley, but across the world. It started with small leaks, unattributed rumors about a mysterious new energy technology being developed at Tesla. A few reports speculated that Elon was preparing to announce a new kind of power generation system that could radically change everything. At first, it seemed harmless. After all, it was just a rumor, right? But then the leaks became more specific. Tech blogs began publishing articles with sensational headlines. Is Elon Musk on the verge of creating perpetual energy? And Tesla's new breakthrough, the end of fossil fuels? The articles didn't have all the details, but they made it clear that something huge was on the horizon. In Washington, D.C., the energy lobbyists began to take notice. The executives at the largest oil and gas companies were becoming nervous. If Elon Musk could actually unlock the power of the Earth's natural energy fields, the world would no longer need their products. Their influence, their profits, it would all come crashing down. And so, behind closed doors, the real work began. One afternoon, as Elon sat in a video call with his leadership team, Maya's face appeared on the screen, her expression serious. Elon, she said, her voice tense. We've got a problem. What's happened? Elon asked, straightening in his chair. Someone's trying to hack into the prototype's data, she replied. We've been monitoring the servers, and there are traces of external access attempts. It's subtle, but we're seeing the signs. Someone is trying to find out everything about the device. Elon's brow furrowed. Who? I don't know yet, Maya said, but this isn't the first time. A few of our key patents have been targeted as well, and our cybersecurity team is tracking multiple suspicious logins from anonymous IP addresses. Elon's mind raced. The energy prototype was still under development, and while it had shown promise, it wasn't ready for mass production. Yet people were already trying to steal it? Who would go to such lengths so early? The answer came quickly, too quickly. Oil companies, Elon muttered, under his breath. They're not going to let this go. Maya nodded grimly. We've expected this. But what's worse is that there's talk of legislation, tightening regulations around new energy sources. They're not just trying to steal the tech, they're trying to stop it from ever reaching the market. Elon sat back, his thoughts swirling. He knew this day would come. Every major technological shift had its share of opposition, and this one, this energy breakthrough, would be no different. We need to accelerate our efforts, he said decisively. Let's get the prototype to a place where we can demonstrate it publicly. We'll release our findings to the world before they can block it. That night, in the quiet of his office, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play. The tension in the air was palpable. What was it about this energy technology that had already attracted such intense opposition? Sure, oil and gas companies were notorious for protecting their interests, but this felt personal. And then there was the other side of it, the unexpected consequences of what might happen if the device worked as they hoped. If they succeeded, the entire global power structure would be upended. But he had made a commitment. Elon wasn't just trying to change the world, he was trying to save it. The idea of perpetual, clean energy had the potential to solve so many of the world's problems: pollution, energy inequality, even geopolitical conflict over fossil fuels. Still, he wasn't naive. There were always unforeseen consequences. Emily was spending more time at the foundation these days, her notebook always close by, her mind constantly churning out new ideas. She didn't understand everything that was happening around the prototype's success, the pressure, the threats, the secrecy, but she did understand the significance of what they had done. And her thoughts were always focused on one thing: the balance of energy. She had been raised on the belief that the Earth's systems were inextricably linked. Nothing existed in isolation. The same forces that governed the flow of energy in nature were the same forces that could sustain humanity for generations, if only people understood how to live in harmony with those systems. She sat in the lab one afternoon, sketching out new calculations in her notebook. They were related to the energy output, but there was something else, a secondary effect that had started to bother her. Emily had noticed small fluctuations in the energy flow, anomalies that hadn't been accounted for in the original equations. It wasn't enough to affect the performance of the prototype, but the patterns didn't sit right with her. Something wasn't quite aligned. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was Jonathan Hayes, looking tired but alert. "Hey, Emily," he said, leaning against the door frame. "You're working hard again, huh?" Emily nodded without looking up from her notebook. "Just thinking about the math. There's something off. The energy flow is too perfect. It doesn't make sense. The Earth isn't perfect. It has irregularities, small bursts of energy that we don't fully understand." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "You mean what? Like some kind of hidden force?" Emily looked up, her eyes sharp. "Exactly. I think the energy we're tapping into isn't just the Earth's electromagnetic fields. There's something else at play. A secondary source, something the prototype might be interacting with. And I don't know if that's good or bad." Jonathan hesitated, glancing toward the door. "You're saying it's not just natural energy? It could be something else?" Emily stood up, her voice growing more intense. "I don't know what it is yet, but I need to figure it out. If the device is tapping into another source, we need to understand it before we move forward. If we're not careful, we could be setting off a chain reaction we don't want to deal with." Jonathan's expression grew serious. "Okay, let's take a closer look. But we'll need to keep this between us for now. If word gets out that there might be a problem, it'll set everything back." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of her own words. She didn't know what this secondary force was, but she had an instinct about it. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than just the device. There were forces at play that no one fully understood. Forces that could either save or destroy everything they had worked for. That night, as Emily worked into the early hours of the morning, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were starting to slip out of control. The prototype was working, yes, but there were far deeper currents at play. And soon, she realized, she might not just be battling external forces. She might be facing something far more dangerous: the unintended consequences of unlocking a power greater than they were prepared for. The days that followed were a strange mix of urgency and tension. On the surface, it seemed like everything was moving forward according to plan. The Tesla team was refining the prototype, Emily was continuing her analysis, and Elon was preparing for a high-profile demonstration of the device to select government officials and industry leaders. But beneath the surface, something unsettling was brewing. Elon, for the first time in years, found himself awake late into the night, staring at his computer screen. He couldn't escape the nagging feeling that they were on the cusp of something monumental, but also dangerously volatile. The stakes had never been higher. They had the power to change the world. But the question was, what kind of world would emerge? The prototype was ready for its first public demonstration. It wasn't a full-scale release. Not yet. But Elon knew that if he could prove it worked in front of a select group of the right people, it would generate enough buzz to push the project forward at lightning speed. But something about it didn't sit right with him. Emily's recent warnings about irregularities in the energy flow continued to echo in his mind. She had always been precise, a prodigy in her field, but she had also been reluctant to share her findings in full detail. The secondary force she had alluded to, a force that was affecting the device's energy output, had not been fully understood. And that, Elon thought, could be dangerous. As much as he trusted Emily's intellect, he couldn't ignore the possibility that they were stepping into unknown territory. The world would be watching. The press, the governments, and especially the energy corporations. Everyone would have something to say about it, and none of it would be easy. Meanwhile, Emily sat in the dimly lit corner of the lab, her notebook open before her. She had been working feverishly, trying to decipher the anomalies she had detected in the energy readings from the prototype. At first, the irregularities had seemed harmless, tiny fluctuations in the energy flow that might have been attributed to external factors like temperature or humidity. But the more she observed, the clearer it became that these fluctuations weren't natural. Something, or someone, was interfering. Emily wasn't a conspiracy theorist, but it was hard to ignore the growing sense that they were being watched. She couldn't shake the feeling that the energy prototype was connected to something much larger than they had anticipated. "Are we sure this is just about energy?" she murmured to herself, tapping her pen against the notebook. "Or is it something more?" Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft ping from her computer. It was a message from Jonathan. "Jonathan Hayes, Emily, we need to talk. Something strange is happening." Her heart skipped a beat. They had been working together closely on the project, but lately, Jonathan had seemed more distracted than usual. If he was sending a message like this now, it meant that something was going wrong. She quickly responded, "Emily, what do you mean? Is it about the prototype?" A few seconds later, Jonathan replied, "Jonathan Hayes, meet me in the back lab in 10 minutes. Bring your notes. I think we're being targeted." Emily's stomach tightened. "Targeted?" she whispered. What did he mean by that? Was it the energy companies? The hackers? Or something worse? She grabbed her things and made her way to the back of the lab, where the team had set up the more secure testing equipment. As she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that the ground was shifting beneath her. What if they weren't just on the verge of a breakthrough? What if they were also standing on the edge of a disaster? When Emily entered the back lab, she found Jonathan standing by a large monitor, his face drawn with concern. The glow of the screen highlighted the urgency in his eyes. "Jonathan?" Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Look at this," Jonathan said, stepping aside to let her see the screen. On the monitor was a series of energy readings from the prototype, but they weren't normal. The data was being corrupted. The energy flow, which had been stable during their last round of tests, was now showing irregular spikes. Unnatural, chaotic surges that seemed to be coming from nowhere. "Those spikes," Emily said, her voice quiet. "They're not random." "I know," Jonathan replied, running his hands through his hair. "We've been monitoring the system for weeks, and we've never seen anything like this. It's almost as if someone is deliberately manipulating the energy output." Emily leaned closer to the monitor, analyzing the data. "This can't be from the prototype itself. We've isolated its energy field. It's coming from the environment around us, and it's getting stronger." Jonathan turned to face her. "What do you mean? From where?" "I don't know yet," Emily said, shaking her head. "But it's clear the device isn't just tapping into natural energy. It's interacting with something else, and that something is trying to control it." Jonathan's eyes widened. "So, you're saying someone's hacking into the system? Or it's some sort of external interference?" Emily paused, her mind racing. "Not exactly. I think it's more than just an outside attack. It's almost as if the system itself is reacting to forces we don't understand. Forces that go beyond anything we've seen in energy theory. This could be the breakthrough, or the catalyst for something we can't control." Jonathan was silent for a long moment, processing her words. Then, he exhaled slowly. "If it's something we can't control, then we need to be extremely careful, Emily. If we don't figure out what's happening, we could lose everything." Emily nodded, her thoughts swirling. I know. We have to fix it before it gets worse. Back in his office, Elon was preparing for the public demonstration. Everything seemed set. He had already notified the necessary officials and arranged for a live broadcast of the event. The world was about to witness the future of energy. But in the back of his mind, there was still that nagging feeling. Then, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Jonathan. Jonathan Hayes, Elon, we need to talk. There's something you need to know before the demonstration. Emily's found something strange. Elon's heart skipped a beat. He stared at the screen for a long moment, trying to process what the message meant. Was it the prototype malfunctioning? Or was there something more sinister at play? He quickly typed a reply. Elon Musk, what's going on? Is it a technical issue? Jonathan Hayes, it's complicated. Meet me in the lab in 20 minutes. We need to discuss it face to face. Elon stood up abruptly. He had a sense that the storm was approaching, and it was bigger than he could have ever imagined. Whatever was going on, it was about to change everything. As the clock ticked down to the demonstration, the shadows around Elon grew darker. There were forces at work, unseen, powerful forces that he couldn't yet comprehend. But he knew one thing for sure. The future of energy wasn't just a technological breakthrough. It was a battle, and he had no idea who or what he was really up against. The sterile hum of the lab was almost deafening as Elon paced back and forth, his mind racing. The message from Jonathan had thrown him off course. Something was wrong, and it was serious. Emily had discovered something strange, and that alone was enough to set alarm bells ringing in Elon's mind. When Emily said something was strange, it was never a small thing. He glanced at the clock. The public demonstration was only a few hours away. He should be focusing on the press conference, finalizing his speech, and preparing for the world's eyes to be on him. But now, none of it seemed to matter. The world's future was on the line, and he had no idea what was coming. As he entered the back lab, Jonathan was already there, looking more stressed than Elon had ever seen him. Emily sat at a workstation, her face pale, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed furiously at the computer. Jonathan, Emily, what's going on? Elon asked, his voice low but urgent. Jonathan looked up from his phone, a grave expression clouding his face. Elon, it's bigger than we thought. Emily didn't look up from her screen. We've been monitoring the prototype's energy output. The system is behaving erratically, and we've traced the cause to the energy fields around the lab. They're fluctuating in ways we don't understand. It's like the prototype is being pulled by something external. Elon frowned. Are you saying the prototype is malfunctioning? Emily shook her head. Not exactly. The prototype is reacting to something in its environment. We're not just dealing with an energy source we can control. There's an unknown force, an unknown field, interacting with it. And it's changing the data. The energy flow is unstable. If it continues like this, the prototype might break down, or worse, it could destabilize the entire energy system. Elon's mind whirled as he tried to process what she was saying. So, what are we dealing with here? Could it be a hacker? Some kind of cyber attack? Emily paused for a moment, then finally looked up from the screen. Her eyes were wide with concern. It's not just hacking, Elon. It's like the prototype itself is tapping into a secondary force, a force beyond the known laws of physics. We've run every simulation, and nothing explains these anomalies. Jonathan added, his voice heavy. We've tried isolating the system from external interference. We've run the prototype in different environments, but every time, these fluctuations happen. It's almost like the energy itself has its own agenda. Elon's stomach sank. He had always known that true innovation could have unintended consequences. But he hadn't expected this. Something so alien, so outside the realm of even his vast understanding. Are you saying we can't fix it? Elon asked, his voice tight. Emily bit her lip, hesitating before answering. It's not that we can't fix it. It's that I don't know what we're really dealing with. The device is drawing power from a source that doesn't seem to follow the laws of energy we understand. If we don't figure it out, we could be opening a Pandora's box. There's no way to predict how far this could go. Elon's heart pounded in his chest. This was not just a technical issue. This was a fundamental shift. If the prototype was truly accessing some unknown energy force, it could change everything, or destroy it all. We don't have time to figure this out completely, Elon said, his tone sharper now. The demonstration is only hours away. We're about to announce this to the world. We can't back out now. Jonathan looked uneasy. You're right, but the risks. I know the risks, Elon interrupted, his voice low but firm. But the world needs to see what we've created. If we can't control it now, we need to show them that we're on the edge of something revolutionary. Once the world sees the potential of this energy, the pressure to succeed will push everything forward. We'll figure out the rest as we go. Emily exchanged a look with Jonathan, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. I'll try to stabilize the system before the demonstration, Emily said finally, her voice quiet but resolute. But you need to be prepared. If the energy starts spiking uncontrollably, we may need to shut it down immediately. We can't afford to risk a public meltdown. Elon nodded, his mind already racing ahead. We'll proceed with caution. But we're going forward with this. As the demonstration approached, the tension in the air grew palpable. Elon felt a strange sense of detachment, like he was watching his own life unfold from a distance. This was the culmination of years of work, of sleepless nights and risky investments. He had promised the world a new future, and now he was about to deliver it. But was the future they were about to usher in one they could control? The demonstration was set to take place at Tesla's private facility, just outside of Palo Alto. A select group of politicians, industry leaders, and journalists were invited. A live broadcast would beam the event into homes around the world. Elon had planned this moment carefully, knowing it could define the course of history. As the guests began to arrive, Elon felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just another product launch. This was a shift, a change in the very foundation of human progress. If this worked, the entire world would change. And if it didn't? No, he couldn't think that way. He had to focus on the vision, focus on the future. Inside the main demonstration room, Emily and Jonathan were busy finalizing the last-minute adjustments to the prototype. The device sat at the center of the room, a sleek, metallic structure that pulsed with a faint blue light. Its energy core hummed softly, barely noticeable to the untrained eye. But Emily knew better. She could feel the anomaly in the air, the strange force that seemed to swirl around the prototype, tugging at the very fabric of the energy field they had created. Is it stable? Jonathan asked, his voice tight with concern. For now, Emily replied, her gaze fixed on the data readings. But I can't promise it will stay that way. The fluctuations are growing more intense. If we don't get a handle on it soon. Elon entered the room, his presence instantly commanding attention. How are we looking? He asked, his gaze sharp. Emily turned to him. It's still unstable. We're pushing it to the limit. Elon nodded, his mind already running the calculations. We're not backing down. Let's show the world what we can do. I believe in this. He took a step toward the prototype, the anticipation of the moment beginning to buzz in his veins. They were about to change everything. And in a strange way, he couldn't help but feel like he was standing at the precipice of something greater than any of them had anticipated. As the event began, Elon delivered his speech with his usual charisma, outlining the potential of the energy device, detailing how it could end humanity's dependence on fossil fuels and usher in a new era of sustainable, limitless energy. His words were bold, visionary. The crowd listened in rapt attention, but behind the scenes, the tension was rising. Emily and Jonathan were watching the data on their screens, their faces grim. The energy fluctuations had started again, this time with more intensity. The readings were fluctuating wildly, sending alarm signals through the system. Then, it happened. Without warning, a massive surge of energy blasted from the prototype. The entire building shook, lights flickering and dimming as the energy output soared beyond anything they had anticipated. The prototype, as if reacting to an unseen force, began to hum with a deafening intensity. Shut it down. Now, Emily shouted, rushing toward the control panel. But it was too late. The energy surge continued to grow, its force seemingly beyond their control. The prototype was no longer just a device. It was something else entirely, a force of nature, untethered and unstoppable. The room descended into chaos. The room was alive with chaos. The flashing lights, the alarms blaring from every corner. The hum of the prototype, once a soft, steady pulse, had turned into a terrifying roar that seemed to vibrate through the very bones of everyone present. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the weight of something they didn't fully understand. Emily's fingers flew over the control panel, desperately trying to override the system. But the energy readings were completely off the charts now, surging in every direction like a wild, uncontrollable storm. It was as if the prototype had become a beacon for something. Someone, out there, something that had awakened and was now feeding off the device's power. Jonathan stood frozen, eyes glued to the screen, watching as the energy levels skyrocketed beyond what they had ever tested. The data was nonsensical, impossible to comprehend. "This can't be happening," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Elon, still standing near the prototype, felt the floor vibrate beneath his feet. The building itself seemed to be alive with the pulse of the energy. Every inch of the room felt charged with raw power, and a sense of panic began to creep into his chest. "Emily, do something," he shouted, his voice sharp with fear. "I am doing something." Emily snapped, her eyes wide with desperation. She hit the emergency shut-off switch, but nothing happened. The device just kept growing, its hum turning into a menacing growl. "This isn't supposed to happen. It's like the system is rejecting the shutdown." The crowd outside, which had been watching the live demonstration, had no idea what was happening behind the closed doors. But the crackling energy was beginning to seep through the walls, visible through the thin cracks in the windows. People inside the building started to notice the strange, flickering light that began to pulse around them, some looking at it in confusion, others beginning to panic. "What's going on?" someone screamed from the crowd outside, but no one had the answers. Elon turned back to the device, eyes locked on the pulsing core. For a brief moment, he thought about pulling back, about aborting the entire demonstration. But his instincts told him to keep going. This was no time for retreat. This was a defining moment. The world would know them for this, for better or for worse. But before he could act, a new sound cut through the chaos, a low, reverberating thrum that seemed to come from the very walls of the room. It felt like a presence, something massive and ancient, far beyond their understanding. And then, the power went out. The lights, the alarms, the machines, all of it fell silent in an instant. The room was plunged into darkness. For a moment, no one spoke. The air was suffocating. The only sound was the pounding of their hearts. And then, everything went quiet. A sudden, eerie stillness that felt almost unnatural. Elon's breath caught in his chest. He wasn't sure what was happening now, but he could feel it. The presence, the weight of it, like a shadow pressing in on them from all sides. "Emily? Jonathan?" he called, his voice unsteady. He couldn't see them in the dark, but he could feel their presence, just a few feet away. "Over here," Emily's voice came, tinged with panic. "I think we've done something terrible." Before Elon could respond, the sound of a faint, familiar hum returned, a softer, but more intense vibration in the air. It wasn't coming from the prototype, though. It was coming from somewhere outside, somewhere beyond the building. A chill crawled up Elon's spine. Then, a voice, calm and unsettling, cut through the quiet. "I told you," it said, the words slipping through the air like a cold breeze. "The energy isn't just a tool. It's a gate." The voice sent a shiver through Emily and Jonathan, who looked at each other in confusion and fear. But Elon, despite the terror that twisted in his gut, felt a strange recognition flood over him. He had heard this voice before, though not in person. It was a voice he had only heard through encrypted messages, through deep-level back channels. A voice that had once promised him the future of humanity, a voice that Elon had never fully trusted. And now, here it was, echoing in the empty darkness of the lab. "Who are you?" Elon demanded, his voice rising with frustration and fear. "What is this? What have we done?" The voice chuckled, soft and condescending. "You've unlocked it, Musk. The energy. The force you've tapped into is not of this world. You thought you were building a new future, but you've opened a doorway to a reality beyond your comprehension. A pulse of energy shot through the room, and suddenly the lights flickered back on, weak and dim, like a dying flame. The energy core of the prototype glowed faintly, but now there was something wrong about it. The familiar blue light had darkened to an unsettling shade, like a black hole waiting to swallow everything in its path. Elon stumbled back, his mind reeling. No, this can't be right. This is just a power source. It's not a doorway. It's not. The voice ignored his protests. You've breached the barrier. The quantum field is unstable now. The energy is no longer a tool. It is a conduit, a pathway. And soon, Musk, you will understand the consequences of your actions. The prototype hummed louder, the fluctuations in its energy reaching a deafening pitch. The air seemed to warp around them, distorting the reality of the room, bending light in strange, unnatural ways. Emily, Jonathan, what do we do? Elon shouted, his mind racing. This wasn't just about controlling a power source anymore. This was about survival. Emily's voice trembled as she spoke. I don't know. I can try to reverse it, but the energy is too unstable. We're in uncharted territory. If we don't stop it soon. But before she could finish her sentence, the floor beneath them cracked. A loud rumble shook the building, sending everyone stumbling to the ground. The walls cracked, and for a moment, Elon thought they were going to collapse entirely. In that instant, he realized the full weight of what they had unleashed. They hadn't just disrupted the natural order of energy, they had opened a door. And whatever was on the other side was now looking at them. He turned to Emily, his voice hoarse. We need to get out of here. Now. But as the building continued to tremble, a shadow appeared in the doorway. The figure was tall, its features obscured by the strange, warping light. It stepped forward, a being of energy and darkness, like a shadow in human form. And it was looking directly at them. The figure stepped into the room, its presence overwhelming. The air seemed to bend and ripple around it, like reality itself was struggling to comprehend its existence. Elon felt his pulse quicken, every instinct telling him to run, to escape, but his feet were frozen in place, glued to the ground by an unseen force. The energy in the room crackled like static, surging in waves, growing stronger with every passing second. The figure, tall, dark, and utterly alien, loomed in the doorway. It was humanoid, but the details were difficult to discern. Its form seemed to blur at the edges, as if it were composed of shifting shadows or light. The flickering, dying lights in the lab cast strange reflections off its body, making it look both present and not. Who are you? Elon demanded, his voice shaking but defiant. What do you want? The figure tilted its head slightly, as if considering the question, before speaking in a low, resonant voice that vibrated in Elon's chest. I am the keeper of the gate, the guardian of the threshold. I exist where the boundaries of your reality and mine intersect. Elon's heart hammered in his chest. This doesn't make sense. You're not real. Oh, but I am, the figure replied, its voice both distant and immediate, as though it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. And neither is your device. The gate you've activated is not of your world. It is an artifact of a reality beyond your understanding, a technology not made by humans. The energy you've harnessed is only the first step. It has opened the door between our realms, and now you will see what lies beyond. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. This can't be happening. Jonathan, still standing frozen, his face pale with fear, slowly took a step back. What is he talking about, Elon? A gate? Between worlds? Elon couldn't tear his eyes away from the figure, whose form seemed to be subtly shifting with every passing moment. It was both there and not, an impossible distortion of the space around it. He knew they were standing at the precipice of something huge, but he had no idea whether it would be humanity's salvation or its doom. Elon began, his voice hoarse. You're saying the prototype isn't just a power source. It's a gateway to another world? The figure stepped forward, its every movement slow, deliberate. The very ground beneath it seemed to tremble, and the air grew thick, charged with energy. The device you've created is a key. It is a link between realities. And now that the door is open, the forces that dwell on the other side will come. Who are they? Emily's voice cracked as she spoke, but the question was urgent. What do they want? What do you want? The figure remained silent for a moment, its form flickering like a distant star that could vanish at any time. Then, with a voice like thunder, it answered. They are beings of pure energy, entities of thought and force. They are the children of the original architects of the multiverse. They have long watched your world, curious about your progress. And now that the gate is open, they will come. They are inevitable. Jonathan shuddered, glancing nervously at Elon. We need to shut this down, right now. Whatever we've done, we have to fix it before it's too late. Impossible, the figure spoke again, its voice like the sound of an earthquake. The gate has already been opened. The forces you have unleashed cannot be undone. The only question now is whether you will survive the coming storm. Elon felt a cold chill run down his spine. He had always known that pushing the boundaries of human knowledge could lead to unexpected consequences, but this was beyond anything he could have ever prepared for. What do we do? Emily whispered, looking to Elon, her face pale with fear. How do we stop them? How do we stop this? The keeper of the gate turned its head slightly, as if sensing the despair in the room. You cannot stop what has already begun, but you can choose how you meet your fate. You have awakened the Ancient Ones. Now, you must decide whether to face them with defiance or with surrender. Elon's mind raced. This was not a normal technological failure. This was something much bigger, something ancient, something beyond anything he could control. But one thing was clear. He couldn't let it end like this. He couldn't just sit back and let humanity be consumed by forces it didn't understand. Not without a fight. How can we fight this? Elon demanded, his voice rising with renewed determination. We're just human. We don't have the power to go up against this. The keeper seemed to smile, though it was more an expression of understanding than amusement. You don't. Not yet. But you have one advantage, Musk. The gate is not just a pathway. It is a threshold. It is a place where the laws of your reality and mine are malleable. You can change what happens next. If you act quickly, you can stop the tide before it overwhelms your world. Elon's heart pounded in his chest. And how do we do that? That, the keeper said, its voice like a fading whisper, is the true question. But know this, time is no longer on your side. Every second you waste is a second closer to the storm that will sweep through your world. If you wish to protect it, you must find the heart of the gate. Only then will you have the power to close it again. For a long moment, the room was silent. Elon stood frozen, his mind churning with the implications of what he had just heard. The keeper of the gate was offering them a way out, but it sounded impossible. To find the heart of the gate? To somehow shut down a force that was beyond anything humanity had ever encountered? It was a task that seemed more like a myth than reality. But there was no other choice. They couldn't just let these ancient, unknown forces take over the world. They couldn't surrender to something they didn't understand. Okay, Elon said finally, his voice steady despite the rising fear. We'll find the heart of the gate. We'll figure out a way to stop this. The keeper inclined its head, as if acknowledging his determination. Time is of the essence. And remember, your world is not the only one at risk. With that, the figure began to fade, its form slowly dissolving into the shifting shadows. The energy in the room pulsed one final time, sending a surge through the walls, before it disappeared completely. The lab was quiet again, eerily so, but the silence didn't last long. Through the walls, Elon could hear the sound of distant rumblings. A tremor ran through the ground beneath his feet. The storm had already begun. The lab was now eerily quiet, but the tension in the air felt heavier than ever. The hum of the prototype had faded, but the aftershocks of the energy unleashed remained, lingering in the room like a dark cloud. Elon, Emily, and Jonathan stood frozen, trying to process what had just occurred. The keeper's words echoed in their minds. The heart of the gate. Elon's stomach churned. They had been told they could stop what had been set in motion, but how? What did the heart of the gate even mean? And how could they find it before the ancient forces outside broke through completely? Elon knew time was running out. "We need to move," he said, breaking the silence. His voice was firm, filled with the urgency of the situation. "If the Keeper is right, we need to find this heart before it's too late." Emily looked at him, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. "But where do we even begin? How do we find something that could close a gate to another world? This is beyond us." Jonathan, still pale from the shock of the encounter, stepped forward. "We have to try. If we don't, we'll have no chance of stopping what's coming." The Keeper said the heart is where the laws of reality are malleable. If we can find it, maybe we can use it to close the gate. But we don't have much time. Elon glanced at the flickering displays around them. They all showed strange, erratic data now, codes and symbols that made no sense. The prototype, once a powerful tool of human innovation, had turned into a dark mirror of everything they feared. It was no longer a machine. It was a conduit for something far more dangerous. "All right," Elon said, shaking his head to clear the confusion. "We need to track the source of this energy. The heart of the gate is likely connected to the device, or at least the energy fluctuations we're seeing. If we can get to the core of it, we may be able to stop it." "But how?" Emily asked. "The Keeper said we would need to act quickly, but the building itself is reacting to the energy. We could be trapped in here." Elon paused, his eyes narrowing. "I'm not willing to risk it. We need to get to the heart of this, wherever it is. There's no time to waste." As they moved through the dimly lit corridors of the lab, the sounds of distant rumblings grew louder. The building's foundation trembled beneath their feet, and a strange distortion rippled in the air. It was as if the very fabric of the world was beginning to tear apart, ever so slowly. Elon's thoughts raced. They had to make it to the heart of the gate, the center of all this chaos. But what would they even find when they got there? Would they be able to reverse the process, or would they be too late? The hallway they entered seemed to stretch on forever, the walls bending and warping as they walked. The building itself seemed to be alive, as if it was reacting to the energy that had been released. The air was thick, heavy with static electricity, and every step felt like it brought them closer to something monstrous. "What do we even know about the heart?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Elon's mind raced. The Keeper said it was where reality and the other world collided. If we can find it, we can possibly use its power to reverse the flow, shut the gate before it opens completely. Jonathan wiped his brow. "But how? What are we looking for? How do we even recognize it when we find it?" Elon shook his head. "I don't know. But the energy we're seeing, if we can track it back to its source, maybe we can pinpoint it." As they moved further into the building, the strange distortions grew more intense. The walls flickered, then seemed to stretch and bend unnaturally. The lights above them flickered, casting shadows that seemed to twist and shift, like they had a life of their own. Then, suddenly, the corridor ahead of them opened into a massive chamber. The room was unlike any they had seen before. An immense, cavernous space, filled with machinery that hummed with the same strange energy as the prototype. In the center of the room stood the heart of the gate, a massive structure, a pulsing, glowing orb of energy that hovered in the air, surrounded by a web of twisting metal and glowing tendrils. It was like something out of a dream, alien, incomprehensible, and powerful beyond measure. The air around the orb crackled with energy, and Elon felt his skin tingle as they stepped closer. The room seemed to warp with every movement, as if time itself was bending around them. The orb pulsed with a rhythm, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. And as they got closer, Elon could feel something shift, a presence that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "It's here," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "This is it, the heart of the gate." Emily's eyes widened. "It's beautiful, but terrifying." Jonathan took a cautious step forward. "So this is where it all leads. This is the power behind the gate. But how do we close it? How do we stop it?" Elon studied the orb, feeling its pull. He knew the stakes were higher than ever, but there was no turning back now. The Keeper's words echoed in his mind. The heart of the gate is where reality and the multiverse collide. He took a deep breath, stepping forward. We need to disrupt the energy flow. If we can destabilize the orb, maybe we can reverse the process, shut down the gate before it consumes us. But as soon as he stepped closer, a low hum filled the room, a vibrating pulse that shook the very air around them. The orb's light flickered, and the walls of the room began to warp even more violently. The energy had grown unstable. Something was happening. The world around them was beginning to distort. "We need to hurry," Emily said, panic in her voice. "This isn't just a doorway anymore. It's something else. Something alive." Elon nodded grimly. "I know. And it's not just a doorway to another world. It's a pathway. And if we don't shut it down now, everything will change forever." He turned back to the orb, heart racing, and noticed something that made his blood run cold. The web of tendrils surrounding the orb had begun to writhe, as if it were alive. They seemed to reach toward them, stretching out with a hunger that sent a chill through him. Before he could react, the sound of voices echoed in the distance. The rumbling outside had grown louder, and there was no doubt now. Whatever had been unleashed was beginning to break free. They were running out of time. The orb at the heart of the gate pulsed ominously, its glow intensifying, casting an eerie light that seemed to distort everything around it. The air in the chamber was thick with a sense of impending doom, as if the room itself was a pressure cooker, slowly winding tighter with every passing second. The energy was rising to an unbearable crescendo. They were standing on the edge of something immense, something incomprehensible. Elon felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His mind raced, trying to process everything that had happened and everything that was about to happen. The Keeper had warned them. The gate was no longer just a portal. It was a force of nature, a conduit between worlds that had been opened by their own hands. And now they had to close it before their world was consumed by whatever lay beyond. How do we stop it? Emily's voice was barely a whisper, as if speaking louder would somehow make the situation worse. How do we undo this? Elon scanned the room, his eyes flicking over the glowing tendrils of energy that had begun to writhe, twisting and pulsating like living creatures. They seemed to reach toward them, as if drawn to their presence. The air crackled with static, and he could feel a growing pressure against his chest, as if the very atmosphere was being altered by the power surging around them. "We need to disrupt the energy flow," Elon said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "If we can sever the connection, it might destabilize the orb and close the gate." Jonathan stepped forward, his face drawn with fear, but determination in his eyes. "Disrupting the flow? How?" "The whole room is saturated with this energy. There's no way to control it." "We don't need to control it," Elon said, eyes narrowing. "We just need to sever it. Think of it like cutting the power to a machine. If we can find the source, maybe we can shut it down." Emily looked at him, shaking her head. "But how do we even find the source? The whole building is reacting to the energy. It's everywhere." Elon didn't have an answer, but his eyes kept returning to the swirling tendrils, which had now become almost tangible, stretching like fingers of pure energy, reaching toward them with an unnerving hunger. The orb was humming louder, sending ripples through the very air. Then, without warning, the room trembled violently. The energy spiked in an explosive burst that sent them all stumbling backward. The walls around them flickered in and out of focus, as if reality itself was buckling under the pressure of the unleashed force. "We need to act now," Elon shouted. "Find the control center. There has to be a way to sever the link." Jonathan moved toward the far side of the room, where a series of strange symbols were glowing faintly on a large panel embedded into the wall. "Over here. This might be some kind of interface. If this is part of the original design, maybe it's connected to the heart." The energy in the room intensified, responding to their movements. The tendrils in the air snapped toward Jonathan as if sensing his presence. Emily rushed to his side, pulling him back just in time as one of the glowing tendrils shot past, narrowly missing him. "Get away from it," Emily shouted, pulling Jonathan further back toward Elon. The orb flashed, and for a moment, everything in the room went still. A deep, vibrating hum filled the space as if the very fabric of the universe was holding its breath. Then, the distortion began. The walls started to warp, bending and twisting in unnatural ways. Elon's vision blurred, and the sounds around him grew muffled, as if the very air had thickened. The room was no longer just a room. It was becoming a doorway in itself, an unstable intersection of realities where the laws of physics and time were breaking down. Elon's heart raced. The Keeper's warnings had been clear. Once the gate opened, it wouldn't just let one reality bleed into another. It would tear them both apart. "We don't have time," Elon muttered, almost to himself. He reached out, fingers brushing the surface of the glowing panel Jonathan had found. The symbols were strange, alien, but something about them felt right. As his fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot through him, a searing jolt that lit up his nervous system like a lightning strike. For a moment, his vision went white with pain, and he almost collapsed. But then, through the haze, something clicked. He could feel it. A connection. A flow. The heart of the gate wasn't just a device. It was a living thing, a conduit that tied the two worlds together, pulsing with raw, untamed energy. "It's not just a machine," Elon said, his voice hoarse. "It's a living energy source. A bridge. A link between us and them." He could feel the pull of it now, the tug of the other side, as if something, or someone, was trying to reach through the gate to take hold of this world. "We have to sever the flow. Now," Elon repeated, determination rising in his chest. "Emily, Jonathan, help me. We need to find the core of this thing and disconnect it." But just as they began to move, a deafening roar erupted from the orb. The ground shook violently beneath them, throwing them off balance. The walls cracked, and for a split second, Elon thought the building might collapse altogether. Then, the light from the orb intensified, blinding them. Elon felt his body jerk backward as if a massive force was pulling him away, and his vision blurred to white. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the overwhelming presence of energy, the crushing pressure in the air, and the sound of his own heartbeat in his ears. And then, as if by instinct, his fingers found the controls again. The symbols on the panel shifted under his touch, glowing brighter in response, as if it had finally recognized him. A deep hum reverberated through the building, followed by a soft click. The orb shuddered. The temperature in the room dropped. The air felt heavy, oppressive. The glowing tendrils that had been reaching toward them froze in place, their light dimming rapidly. The walls stopped warping. For the first time, the building was still. Elon, panting heavily, watched as the orb flickered, its pulse slowing. Slowly, methodically, the energy began to retract, withdrawing into the heart. The oppressive feeling in the air started to lift, and the room began to stabilize. "It's working," Jonathan gasped, his voice trembling. "I think we've done it." But then, from the shadows, a new sound emerged, low, guttural, like a growl that reverberated in their bones. The Keeper's warning echoed in Elon's mind. They are inevitable. Before any of them could react, the shadows in the room seemed to twist and bend, and a figure, tall, dark, and unmistakably alien, stepped forward from the swirling darkness, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. And it was looking straight at them. The figure emerged from the shadows with an eerie grace, its form both fluid and solid, like a shadow cast by an impossible light. Elon, Emily, and Jonathan froze, their eyes locked on the towering silhouette that seemed to shimmer and distort with every passing second. It was not the Keeper. This was something far more menacing, far more tangible. The air grew thick with an oppressive energy, far stronger than before. The room hummed as though it were alive, resonating with the unnatural presence of the being before them. Elon's breath hitched. His heart raced. This was it. The force they had unleashed wasn't just a mere consequence of their mistake. It was a force alive, an ancient, sentient power from beyond the gate. And it was here, standing before them. The figure's eyes, two glowing orbs of intense, electric blue, pierced through the dimness, locking onto Elon with unblinking intensity. It didn't speak, but the air vibrated with its presence. Every breath felt labored, as if the very molecules around them were being drawn toward it. "Who, or what are you?" Jonathan whispered, his voice barely audible, but there was a crack of fear and awe in it. The figure tilted its head slightly, its movements unnaturally smooth and deliberate. Then, without a word, it stepped forward. The ground beneath its feet shuddered, and the lights flickered wildly as if reacting to its very existence. The orb, which had been dimming with Elon's interference, pulsed back to life, its glow growing brighter and fiercer. "I am not your keeper," the figure's voice resonated through the air, low and ancient, like a distant storm rumbling over the horizon. "I am the gatekeeper of the multiverse, the one who watches, the one who controls. And you, human, have foolishly unlocked a door that was never meant to be opened." Elon's mind spun, trying to process the enormity of what he was hearing. A gatekeeper of the multiverse? The figure continued, its voice somehow both distant and near. "The doorway you've created was not meant for your kind. It was never meant to be entered by you. It was only ever to be a passage. But now, you have defiled it. And for that, you will face the consequences." Emily's hand trembled as she reached for Jonathan's arm, her voice barely a whisper. "What does it mean, Elon? What does it want from us?" Elon swallowed hard, his mind racing for answers. He knew they were no longer dealing with just a technological failure. This wasn't just a scientific anomaly. It was a confrontation with something far beyond their understanding, a force that existed outside the laws of their universe. Elon began, but the gatekeeper's voice cut through him, as if it had anticipated his thoughts. "Do not think to bargain, Musk," the figure said, the words vibrating in their very bones. "There is nothing you can offer. The gate has been opened, and now I must ensure that you, and your world, pay the price." The air grew colder as the figure raised a hand, and a wave of dark energy surged from its palm. The temperature plummeted, and the walls around them began to buckle and distort once more. The lights flickered and exploded, plunging the room into near darkness. Elon, Emily, and Jonathan staggered back as the energy rippled outward from the gatekeeper, making the very ground beneath them tremble. The orb, the heart of the gate, was no longer under their control. It pulsed with an unbearable intensity, its energy building rapidly. "No!" Elon shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "We can still fix this. We can still shut it down." But the gatekeeper's gaze bore into him with a cold, unyielding force. "You have already unleashed the flood. What remains now is not in your hands." With a swift motion, the gatekeeper extended its hand toward the orb, and the tendrils of energy around the room reacted. They extended toward the orb, wrapping around it like vines, growing stronger and faster with every second. The fabric of space itself began to twist, as if the boundary between the two worlds was breaking open. Elon could feel it now, the other world, pressing in from the edges, demanding entry. The vibrations of the energy intensified. "No," Elon whispered, his eyes wide with horror. Emily grabbed his arm, pulling him back as the orb's glow grew to blinding intensity, filling the room with a painful light. The temperature dropped even further, and they could see their own breath in the freezing air. "Do you understand now?" The gatekeeper's voice was a low hum. "Your world is no longer just a world. It is a thin place, caught between realities. There is no turning back. You have torn the veil, and what follows cannot be stopped." A sound like thunder rumbled through the room, and then a flash, white, searing, blinding, erupted from the orb. The very space around them seemed to shatter. Elon shut his eyes against the light. For a brief, terrifying moment, he thought they were finished. The universe was collapsing in on itself. The boundary was breaking. But then, the world paused. Everything stopped. For a split second, it was as if time itself held its breath. When Elon opened his eyes again, the room had changed. The floor beneath them was no longer solid. It was as if they were standing on a platform suspended in midair. The familiar lab had vanished, replaced by a vast, empty space stretching endlessly in every direction. There was no sky, no walls, no ground, only a black, swirling void that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The orb, the heart of the gate, hung in the center of the void, glowing brighter than the sun, casting strange, erratic shadows across the endless expanse. The gatekeeper stood before them, its form now clearer, more defined. Its eyes were filled with an ancient, unfathomable knowledge. And yet, despite its power, it seemed almost sad. "You have seen the cost of your actions," it said, its voice deep, echoing through the void. "But there is still a chance. There is always a choice." Elon stared at the gatekeeper, his mind racing. What did it mean? But before he could speak, a sharp cry cut through the air. It was Emily. She had turned, her eyes wide with shock, staring at something beyond them. A crack appeared in the space around the orb. It was a jagged, terrifying tear, one that seemed to grow wider with each passing second. "Something's coming," she gasped. "Something from beyond." The gatekeeper turned its gaze toward the crack, its expression unreadable. "Yes, it is inevitable." The tear widened, and through it, something moved. A shadow, dark and formless, slithered through the breach. It was unlike anything Elon had ever seen. An entity that was both everywhere and nowhere, a shifting mass of void and darkness. And in its wake, a chorus of distant, haunting whispers filled the air. The storm was coming. Elon felt the weight of the universe on his shoulders. It was no longer just about saving their world. It was about saving everything. And he knew one thing for certain. The time for running was over. The tear in reality grew wider, its edges jagged and raw, as if something alive were forcing its way through. The air around it rippled and distorted, warping like heat waves on the horizon. Elon's heart hammered in his chest as he instinctively stepped closer to Emily and Jonathan. The gatekeeper remained still, its gaze unwavering. Yet the shadows around it seemed to stir with unease, as if even it recognized the danger now slipping through the breach. "That thing," Emily gasped, her eyes fixed on the growing void. "What is it?" The whispers that emanated from the tear weren't like any sound Elon had ever heard. They were layered, multiple voices speaking at once, distant yet somehow pressing in on his mind. There was a malice to the sound, a coldness that scraped at his thoughts, making his skin crawl. The gatekeeper's voice rumbled again, thick with ancient knowledge. "That child is the Harbinger, a creature born from the intersection of worlds. It is the inevitable consequence of tearing apart the fabric of reality. It comes to feed on the remnants, the broken parts of what was once whole." Elon's breath caught in his throat. Is there no way to stop it? He couldn't believe what he was hearing. A creature, born from their mistake, was now emerging, and it was coming for them. "There is no way to stop it," the gatekeeper said solemnly. "Once the breach is made, the Harbinger will enter, and with it, the destruction of your world will begin. It is the nature of these events. The breach will spread like a virus, consuming all worlds in its path. It will be the end." Jonathan's face was pale as he looked back at Elon, fear etched deeply into his features. "Then, is it over? Is there no hope?" The gatekeeper stepped forward, its eyes glowing faintly, like two distant stars in the vast darkness. "There is always a choice," it said, its tone heavy, but not without a trace of regret. "The door is open. The Harbinger is already in motion. But you, Elon Musk, can stop it. The power to undo this lies within you." Elon's mind reeled. "Me? But I'm just a man. I don't have that kind of power." The words felt hollow, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the gatekeeper wasn't lying. There was something deep inside him that felt different now. A weight in the air around him, a subtle energy that hummed through his bones. "You are more than you think," the gatekeeper replied cryptically, its form shifting in a way that seemed to blur and reform with each word it spoke. "You have touched something ancient, Elon. The technology, the power you uncovered. It is not just of your world. It is of the multiverse itself, the very fabric that binds the infinite realities. You are connected to it, and through you, the path to closure remains." Elon's mind spun. The multiverse? His whole life had been shaped by his ambition to expand the bounds of technology, to push beyond human limits. But now, standing in the heart of an ancient, otherworldly force, the very idea of the multiverse seemed impossible. And yet, the pulse of energy inside him was undeniable. "Tell me how," he said, voice shaking with urgency. "Tell me how to stop this. I'll do whatever it takes." The gatekeeper's eyes dimmed, and the temperature in the room dropped further. "There is a sacrifice required, a choice between life and existence. You must return to the core, the origin of the breach, and sever the connection. Only you, the one who opened the gate, can close it. But beware, the Harbinger will not let you do so easily. It will fight you, and it will stop at nothing to prevent you from undoing what has been set in motion." Emily gripped Elon's arm, her voice a whisper in his ear. "Elon, no, you can't. We can't lose you, not now." He turned to her, meeting her eyes. There was fear in her gaze, but there was also something else, something deeper. Trust. The kind of trust that came from knowing someone had to make the hard choices, even when those choices were unbearable. "I have to, Emily," he said quietly. "If I don't do this, it's all over. Not just for us, but for everything. The multiverse. All of it." He swallowed hard, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "But I won't go alone. You're coming with me." Jonathan shook his head, his expression torn. "It's too dangerous, Elon. The Harbinger is too strong. We don't know what we're dealing with." But Elon's gaze never wavered. "We don't have a choice. We have to close the gate. We have to stop this." The gatekeeper spoke again, its voice growing more urgent. "Time is fleeting. The breach is widening. The Harbinger's power grows with each passing moment. You must act swiftly." Suddenly, the air around them trembled. A gust of cold wind rushed through the room, and the dark tear in space widened, sending a chilling force across the chamber. The Harbinger's whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if it were calling to them, drawing them toward it. Without warning, the creature's form began to solidify, a massive, inky shape that surged through the breach. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the swirling darkness within the tear began to pulse violently, as though it were alive, feeding on the very atmosphere around them. "We're running out of time," Elon said, his voice tight with urgency. "Emily, Jonathan, stay close." The three of them rushed forward, toward the crack in reality, toward the portal that led to the heart of the breach. The gatekeeper did not follow, remaining behind, watching them with its luminous eyes. "You will face the darkness within," it warned. "But remember, everything you know will be tested. Every belief, every certainty." Elon didn't look back. He didn't have time to wonder whether they were making the right choice. They were headed straight into the heart of a storm, with nothing but their courage and the knowledge that if they failed, it wouldn't just be their world that was lost. It would be everything. As they reached the tear in reality, Elon felt an almost physical pull, an invisible force drawing them closer to the orb at the center of the breach. It was there, in the heart of the storm, where the true choice would be made, where the final moment of reckoning would come. And as the Harbinger's massive, shadowy form began to spill out of the rift, Elon knew this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for existence itself. The void before them felt alive. Every inch of the swirling darkness seemed to pulse and breathe with an ominous energy. The breach, now fully open, had become an entry point not just between worlds, but a chasm between the known and the unknown. A place where everything Elon had ever known about science, reality, and even the laws of time and space no longer applied. The orb, brilliant, searing white and floating in the center of the maelstrom, was the heart of the breach. The pulsing light seemed to beat in rhythm with the chaos that surrounded it, sending waves of energy crashing against their bodies, making the air crackle with static. Each step forward felt like pushing against an invisible wall. It was as if reality itself was rejecting them. Emily's hand was locked tightly around Elon's arm, her fingers trembling with both fear and determination. Jonathan walked just behind them, his expression grim but resolute. They had made it this far together, and they weren't about to turn back now. "Do you feel that?" Emily whispered, her voice shaking slightly. Elon nodded. "The energy it's everywhere. This place. It's beyond anything I could have ever imagined. The laws of physics, everything we know, are breaking down." The Harbinger's whispers grew louder, more insistent, like a cacophony of thousands of voices, all speaking at once, each one clawing at their thoughts. It was impossible to tell where the whispers ended and where the sounds of their own minds began. It was inside them now. The darkness had already begun to take root. Suddenly, the air shimmered, and a shadow, the Harbinger, ripped through the breach with terrifying speed. Its form was monstrous, dark and shifting, an ever-changing cloud of malice. It was formless, a writhing mass of void and shadow, its presence distorting the very fabric of reality. Where it moved, time warped, space twisted. The ground beneath them cracked, and the atmosphere trembled with an unnatural force. The Harbinger's shape flickered in and out of existence, but Elon could feel its presence, an ancient and malevolent force that thrived on destruction. Emily gasped, her hand tightening around Elon's arm. "Elon, it's coming. What do we do?" Elon's mind raced. The gatekeeper had warned them. The Harbinger was not just an entity. It was the embodiment of destruction, an unavoidable force born of the collapse of worlds. And now it was here, in the very heart of the breach, growing stronger with each passing moment. "We keep moving," Elon said firmly. "We have to reach the core. The only way to stop this is to sever the connection. If we don't—" The words died in his throat as the Harbinger let out a roar that shook the void, a primal, otherworldly sound that made the very air tremble. The ground quaked beneath their feet, and the rift in space expanded, threatening to consume everything around them. Emily stumbled, her legs buckling under the pressure. "Elon, it's too strong. We won't make it." But Elon didn't waver. He could feel the energy coursing through him now, stronger than ever before. It wasn't just fear, it was purpose. The force inside him wasn't a curse. It was the key to unlocking the solution. He was connected to this place, to the multiverse. Taking a deep breath, he turned to Jonathan, who had kept his eyes fixed on the Harbinger, his face pale with fear. "Jonathan, stay close. We need to reach the orb. Once we're there, I'll need you to help me. Focus." Jonathan didn't answer at first, but after a moment, he nodded. "I'm with you, Elon. Let's finish this." They pushed forward, fighting the relentless pull of the darkness, the weight of the space bending them at every turn. With each step, the whispers grew louder, more intrusive. The Harbinger's form loomed, massive and ever-shifting, its presence bearing down on them like a storm. It would stop at nothing to prevent them from reaching the core. As they approached the orb, a blinding flash of light erupted from within it, illuminating the entire rift with a brilliance that threatened to blind them. The air was charged with so much energy now that Elon could feel his body crackling with it. This was it, the moment of choice. With his mind focused, Elon stepped toward the orb, the others following. He could feel the power radiating from it, a deep, almost overwhelming force that seemed to know him, that recognized the connection between them. The energy was trying to pull him in, to merge with him, to use him, but he had to fight it. He had to close the gate. "Now," he said, his voice hoarse. "Jonathan, Emily, help me focus. This is the only way." The rift trembled again as the Harbinger let out another ear-splitting roar, a wave of darkness sweeping over them. It was almost upon them now, its massive form stretching across the expanse, blotting out the stars in its wake. It was hungry, relentless, and it knew their only hope. With a deep breath, Elon reached out toward the orb, his hand trembling but steady. He could feel the connection, the energy, the power, the threads of reality itself pulling taut around him. And then, he reached into the core. It was like plunging his hand into pure chaos. His body shuddered as if every molecule was being pulled apart and reassembled. The pain was excruciating, but it wasn't just physical. It was mental, spiritual, like the very essence of his being was being torn from him and thrust into the center of a storm. The Harbinger's form seemed to grow larger as it advanced, its whispers reaching a deafening crescendo. It was too late. Elon felt it. It was pulling him in, dragging him into the darkness. But just as he thought he might be consumed, he heard Emily's voice, clear and firm. "Elon, focus. You have to focus." In that moment, The world went silent. The connection clicked. With every ounce of his willpower, Elon grasped the power at the center of the orb. He felt it shifting, felt it realigning. The breach, the rift, everything was bending in response to him. And then, with one final, gut-wrenching effort, he pulled. The core of the breach began to unravel. The Harbinger shrieked, a terrifying howl that filled the space around them, but it was futile. The rift began to close. Slowly at first, but with increasing speed, as the threads of reality rewove themselves. The orb pulsed violently once, then dimmed, its energy pulling back into the void. The Harbinger, now fully formed, howled in fury as the rift began to close around it. But it was too late. The tear was disappearing, the space folding back on itself, collapsing in on the creature. And then, with a final, deafening crack, the rift sealed. For a long moment, there was only silence. The world around them had returned to normal. Well, what was left of it? The ground was solid again, and the sky above was still. The energy that had flooded the space was gone, leaving only a faint trace of its power in the air. Elon, still reeling from the mental and physical toll, lowered his hand. His body trembled, exhaustion overwhelming him. Emily rushed to his side, her eyes wide with concern. "Elon," she whispered, Did we do it?" He couldn't answer at first. His mind was still struggling to comprehend what had just happened. But when he looked around and saw that the breach was closed, that the Harbinger was gone, he knew. "We did it," he said hoarsely. "We stopped it." But as the dust settled, the weight of their actions began to hit home. They had saved their world, but they had also touched something far greater. The multiverse had been irrevocably altered, and now they had to live with the consequences. The silence that followed the closing of the rift was deafening, a quiet so profound, so all-encompassing, that it felt as if the world itself was holding its breath. Elon stood there, frozen, his eyes fixed on the empty space where the breach had been. His hand, still outstretched from the moment he had sealed the orb, trembled as the last remnants of energy faded away. His heart was pounding, but there was no immediate relief, no sense of euphoria. Instead, a deep, gnawing emptiness crept in, the kind that only followed the completion of something too vast, too monumental to fully grasp. Emily and Jonathan stood beside him, equally shaken, their faces pale and drawn from the toll the confrontation had taken on them all. The space around them had returned to normal, but the reality of what they had just done, the destruction they had averted, the price they had paid, hung heavily in the air. "We did it," Emily whispered, as if testing the words, as if doubting whether they were truly true. Her voice broke the silence, but it wasn't the jubilant relief Elon had expected. There was something fragile in her tone, something uncertain. Jonathan was the first to speak again, his voice rough. "We stopped the breach. But what now? What happens to all that power we just unleashed? The Harbinger was just the beginning, wasn't it? Whatever this breach was, we've only closed a door. Who knows what might come through next time?" Elon looked at his friends, his companions in this cosmic journey, and felt the weight of their words. He had been so focused on the immediate crisis, the Harbinger, the breach, the multiversal collapse, that he hadn't fully considered the consequences of their actions. The breach was closed. The Harbinger was defeated. But that didn't mean their world, or the worlds beyond it, were safe. In fact, they were far from it. "We don't know what will come next," Elon admitted, his voice tight. "But we've altered the fabric of reality itself. The multiverse is unstable. The very laws that govern it have been disturbed. It won't be the same anymore." Emily's eyes flickered with a quiet, almost fearful realization. "So, you're saying we've just opened Pandora's box?" Elon met her gaze, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what they had done. "Yes, we've closed one door, but we've just become aware of so many more. The breach wasn't just a tear in space. It was a rift in the very nature of existence. And now, we have no idea what's waiting on the other side." Jonathan shook his head, taking a step back, his hands running through his hair in disbelief. "What does that mean for us? For everyone?" Elon was silent for a moment, his mind racing. He couldn't deny the fear creeping in, the uncertainty gnawing at him. They had survived, but in doing so, they had altered the very course of existence. They weren't just survivors. They were players in something far larger than they could ever have imagined. And in the process, they had become vulnerable. "There's no going back," Elon said softly. "But we can still make sure that whatever happens next, we're ready." The words left his mouth before he could fully process them, but there was something in them, something decisive, something that rang with the same clarity he had once felt when setting out to build SpaceX or Tesla. A sense of purpose that came from facing the unknown and understanding that the only way forward was to confront it head-on. But Emily wasn't looking at him with admiration, or even relief. Instead, there was an unsettling gaze in her eyes. "Elon," she said carefully, almost as if she were speaking to someone who had changed, "are we really ready? You've changed, we've all changed. Do you understand the cost of this?" Her question hung in the air like a heavy mist, and for the first time since the breach had closed, Elon understood the full gravity of what had transpired. The power they had unleashed, the knowledge they had gained. It had changed them. The very fabric of reality had touched them, had shaped them in ways they might never fully comprehend. He turned to face her, meeting her gaze with a newfound intensity. "No, Emily," he said slowly. "We're not ready. None of us are. But we'll make ourselves ready. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Jonathan stepped forward, his usual bravado absent, replaced by a look of solemnity. "You're right, Elon. We're in this now. There's no going back." For a long moment, no one spoke. They were all still trying to process what had just happened, what they had become. But the silence was not just one of contemplation. It was one of understanding. They had been tested, not just by the breach, but by the very forces that controlled existence itself. Suddenly, Elon felt it again. The subtle, almost imperceptible hum beneath his skin. The energy that had surged through him when he had closed the breach. It was still there, and it was stronger now, as if something inside him had been unlocked. He raised his hand to his chest, feeling the pulse of that power. It wasn't just from the breach. It was him. The connection to the multiverse. The realization hit him with a cold, hard clarity. He was no longer just Elon Musk. He was a part of something far greater, a player in a game that spanned across realities. "The breach is closed," Elon said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "But the multiverse, it's not finished with us yet. We have to be ready." Emily nodded, her eyes wide but resolute. "Ready for what?" "For the next phase," Elon said, his voice quieter now, but the determination was there. "The rift may be closed for now, but we've only begun to understand what we've unleashed. The multiverse is infinite, and now, we're a part of it. We have to find a way to control it, to understand it. And more importantly, we need to prevent the next harbinger from coming through." Jonathan stepped back, looking at the horizon where the rift had once been. "You think the breach was just a one-time thing? Something tells me this is just the beginning." "It is," Elon replied, his gaze hardening. "But we're not helpless. Not anymore." The journey they had embarked upon had altered the very course of existence. They had closed one door, but in doing so, they had opened another. And as the weight of their actions settled in, one thing became clear. The true battle was only just beginning. Days passed since the breach had closed, but the weight of the decision, of the power they had unleashed, hung heavily over Elon, Emily, and Jonathan. Though the skies above had returned to their quiet blue and the world had resumed its pace, something felt different. The air seemed charged with an unspoken tension, an awareness that there were forces now beyond their comprehension, forces that could very well be watching them, waiting for the right moment to act. Elon sat in the dimly lit control room of SpaceX, his eyes tracing the erratic patterns on the holographic interface in front of him. His fingers hovered over the keys, though they didn't move. It wasn't the technical details that had him frozen. It was the knowledge that everything had changed. The same knowledge gnawed at him now that had once pushed him to reach the stars. But this wasn't the same thing. This wasn't about Mars or the future of humanity. This was about the very fabric of existence itself. You're quiet today, Emily said from behind him, her voice soft but knowing. Elon didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He could feel her presence, the quiet pull of her attention. They had been through so much together, and yet now, they were all aware that things had shifted, even between them. I'm trying to understand it, Elon said, his voice distant. What we did. How it's possible. The breach, it wasn't just a tear in space. It's like we tapped into something bigger, something ancient. Emily crossed the room, taking a seat beside him. You're not the only one thinking about it. Jonathan's been saying the same thing. The laws of physics we thought we knew, they don't apply anymore. Not with the energy we released. I know, Elon replied, but it's more than that. It's like we've awoken something that might already know about us. The words hung in the air between them, thick with unspoken dread. For the first time since the breach had closed, Elon allowed himself to acknowledge the terrifying truth. The multiverse, in all its vastness, was aware of their presence. They had crossed its threshold. They were no longer just observers. They were part of its intricate, unknowable tapestry. Maybe we're just imagining things, Emily said quietly, though her eyes betrayed the uncertainty she was trying to hide. Maybe we stopped the harbinger, and that's the end of it. I wish I could believe that, Elon muttered. But every time I close my eyes, I can still feel it. The pulse, the energy. It's like it's inside me now. And not just me, all of us. You, Jonathan, we're connected to something we don't understand. As if on cue, the sound of rapid footsteps echoed from the hallway outside the control room. The door slid open, revealing Jonathan, his face drawn and tired but with a fire in his eyes. Elon, Emily, you need to see this, he said, urgency in his voice. There's been a transmission. Elon stood up, his mind already racing. From who? Jonathan's eyes flickered. I don't know, but it's coming from something that's not human. It's been repeating. It's the same signal, over and over again. It's like it's trying to get our attention. Elon exchanged a look with Emily. Her face was pale, but there was no hesitation in her eyes. She was already on her feet, moving toward the exit. Without another word, they followed Jonathan down the hall, past rows of tech monitors, and the constant hum of SpaceX operations. As they entered the monitoring room, the flashing signal on the main screen immediately caught Elon's attention. The patterns were strange, complex, layered, like something beyond human comprehension. It's like a language, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. But not any language I've ever seen. Jonathan tapped a few commands on the terminal. The transmission cut through the static, becoming clearer, though the meaning was still indecipherable. It was a distorted sequence of symbols, shifting rapidly in a pattern that seemed to dance across the screen, forming shapes that seemed alive. Elon's pulse quickened. He recognized the pattern now. He had seen something like it before, during the breach, as the rift began to form. It had been there, pulsing behind the chaos, like an ancient code. It's not just a message, Elon said, his voice trembling slightly with realization. It's a warning. A warning? Emily echoed, her brow furrowing. From who? That's what we need to find out, Elon said, already moving toward the main console. If the multiverse is aware of us, then this signal, it's not just a random transmission. Someone or something is trying to communicate. Jonathan leaned in, scanning the signal. It's not coming from any known satellite or transmitter. It's as if it's coming from the rift, like it's waiting for us. The hairs on the back of Elon's neck stood on end. The signal wasn't just a warning. It was an invitation to something far greater, far more dangerous than anything they had encountered so far. But there was something else too, something even more unsettling. Elon, Jonathan said quietly, his face growing pale. There's a pattern in the transmission. It's repeating the same phrase. Elon's breath caught in his throat as Jonathan typed a final command, and the phrase materialized on the screen. We are watching. We are waiting. Your time is coming. The room fell into silence, the message echoing in their minds long after it had flashed on the screen. The implications were clear. They were being watched, and not just by anything human. What does it mean? Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "It means," Elon said, swallowing hard, "that the multiverse is calling us." The weight of the words settled heavily in the room, and the air seemed to grow thick with a growing sense of dread. They had closed one door, but the message they had received made it clear. There were far greater forces at play, forces that knew of them, that were now aware of their existence. And they were waiting. The room felt suffocating. Even though the transmission had ended, the eerie message lingered in the air, like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Elon, Emily, and Jonathan stood frozen in the monitoring room, their eyes glued to the screen where the strange symbols had been displayed moments earlier. The message they had received, "We are watching. We are waiting. Your time is coming," was not something they could easily dismiss. It was a direct challenge, a warning, or perhaps a summons. They didn't know which, but whatever it was impossible to ignore. "We need to find out who sent that," Jonathan said, his voice tight with a mix of fear and determination. That transmission was something else. "It's not from any network we know. It's like it's coming from another reality." Elon didn't respond immediately. His mind was still racing, processing the implications of what they had just encountered. He had always prided himself on being able to understand the unknown, to break down the barriers of what was possible. But this was different. This was beyond even his understanding, and it terrified him. "You're right," he finally said, his voice steady despite the turbulence inside. "We need to find the source, but we also need to prepare. The message isn't just a warning. It's a sign that something, or someone, is out there, watching us. We have to be ready for whatever happens next." Emily nodded, her expression grave. "So, what do we do? If the multiverse is aware of us, if this is bigger than anything we've faced before, how do we even begin to deal with it?" Elon turned to face her, his mind already working through the possibilities. "We need to understand the transmission. It's not just a random signal, it's deliberate. Whoever sent it is trying to communicate. The patterns in the transmission, they're not just random. They're a code, a message we need to decode." Jonathan stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and resolve. "If we can figure out the code, we might be able to understand what we're dealing with. Maybe even contact whoever is out there." Elon felt a wave of tension wash over him. "We're dealing with something far beyond us," he said quietly. "But yes, we'll try. We have no other choice." They spent the next few hours working tirelessly, poring over every fragment of the transmission they had received. Elon had called in some of his most trusted engineers and experts from SpaceX, though he knew that the technology they were used to, satellite networks, deep space probes, even AI-driven simulations, might not be enough to crack the code. This was something new, something that no human mind had encountered before, and it was clear. Whatever was on the other side of this transmission had the ability to shape the course of reality itself. "We're missing something," Emily said, leaning over the console, her eyes scanning the screen. "The code, it's like it's layered. Each symbol isn't just a character. It's an energy. It's almost as if the transmission is alive." Elon raised an eyebrow. "Alive?" "It's the only way I can explain it," she said, frustration evident in her tone. "Every time I try to break it down logically, the symbols shift. They change. They adapt." Jonathan's eyes widened as he stared at the screen. "Like it's reacting to us? To our thoughts?" Emily nodded. "Exactly. It's as if it's aware of us. Like it's testing us." Elon rubbed his temples, trying to think through the problem. It was clear that the transmission wasn't just a simple message. It wasn't an ordinary communication from another civilization, or even a distress signal from some far-off galaxy. It was something far more sophisticated. A living, breathing entity, capable of responding to their actions and thoughts. "This isn't just a message," Elon muttered, his mind racing. "It's a trial. A test." "A test?" Emily repeated, her eyes narrowing. "What kind of test?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Elon said. "Whoever is on the other side of this transmission wants to see how we respond. They're watching, waiting, and they're testing us to see if we're ready for something more." Jonathan glanced at Elon, his face a mixture of awe and fear. "What do you think they want from us?" Elon took a deep breath, running his fingers through his hair. The weight of the situation felt unbearable at times, but there was no going back now. I don't know, but I'm sure of one thing. Whatever they want, it's not something we can avoid. The multiverse, it's alive, and it's vast. And now, it's aware of us. And that means it could reach us, anywhere. He paused, the implications of his words sinking in. The multiverse wasn't just a theory anymore. It wasn't some distant concept that only physicists talked about in abstract terms. It was real, and it was connected to them. Somehow, they had become entangled in its web, whether they were ready for it or not. Emily looked at Elon, her expression serious. So what do we do now? Elon squared his shoulders, his resolve hardening. We keep pushing. We decode the message. We find out who or what is sending it. And we prepare for the worst. Because whatever's out there, it's not going to stop just because we don't understand it. We've already opened the door. Now we need to figure out how to live with what's on the other side. Jonathan was silent for a moment, but then nodded. We don't have a choice, do we? No, Elon said, his voice resolute. We don't. In the days that followed, Elon, Emily, and Jonathan delved deeper into the code. They used every resource at their disposal, applying cutting-edge AI algorithms, quantum computing techniques, and even tapping into SpaceX's satellite network to analyze every nuance of the transmission. But no matter how much they tried to decode it, the transmission only seemed to grow more cryptic, more layered. Every time they thought they had cracked a part of it, it would change, adapt, and shift into something completely different. It was as if the transmission itself had a will, an intelligence, that was deliberately outpacing their attempts to understand it. And then, one morning, something happened. A new signal came through. It wasn't a message this time. It was something else. A vibration. A resonance. Elon's hand froze as he stared at the new transmission. It was a single pulse, a deep, harmonic tone that resonated within the core of his chest. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a sensation. The resonance built, rising in pitch, until it reached a crescendo, a note so powerful, so intense, that it nearly shook the walls of the control room. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The room was silent. But Elon knew that this wasn't just a signal. It was a call. And whatever it was meant for them. The silence in the control room was absolute. The resonance from the transmission still reverberated in Elon's chest, the deep, humming tone lingering like an echo in the very fabric of his being. It was no longer just a signal. It felt personal, as if the multiverse, or whatever lay beyond it, had reached out and touched them. Elon's fingers hovered above the console. He knew they were crossing a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed. What they were about to embark upon could change everything. But the question remained. Were they ready? Did you feel that? Emily's voice broke the stillness. She stood beside him, her eyes wide, her face pale, as if trying to comprehend the depth of what had just happened. I felt it, Elon replied, his voice barely above a whisper. That wasn't just a signal. That was intentional. It was designed to resonate with us, to draw us in. Whoever, or whatever, sent that is trying to establish contact. But for what purpose, I don't know yet. Jonathan, who had been staring at the monitor in disbelief, turned to face them. It wasn't just sound. It was like a frequency that pulled at you. A wave of energy. It was alive. Alive in a way I've never felt before. Emily's eyes narrowed. Are you saying this thing out there is reaching for us? Trying to communicate? Elon stood up, pacing slowly, his mind racing through all the possibilities. The resonance had felt almost biological, organic. He couldn't explain it, but something inside him was stirring. An overwhelming sense that they were not just dealing with a signal, but an entity, an intelligence that existed on a plane far beyond their comprehension. I think it's more than that, he said, halting in front of the screen. I think it's offering us a connection, a doorway. It's trying to make us aware of something larger, something more expansive. Jonathan clenched his fists. A doorway to what? Elon turned slowly to face him, his expression somber. A doorway to the unknown. A doorway to the multiverse itself. The room went still. Emily, who had been standing beside him, took a step back. Elon, you can't be serious. You're talking about breaking through everything we've known. The laws of physics, time, reality, everything. I know, Elon said, his voice grim, but we've already crossed a line. We've been touching the fabric of the multiverse for weeks now. The breach, the transmission, it's all connected. We can't ignore it anymore. Emily's brow furrowed. So what now? What do we do with this call? Elon met her gaze. His mind was torn between fear and exhilaration. This could be the ultimate breakthrough, the discovery of a lifetime. Or it could be a trap, a test they weren't prepared to face. We listen, Elon said finally. We decode it. We trace the signal. We follow the call, wherever it leads us. But this time, we do it carefully. We have no idea what's waiting on the other side. But one thing is clear. We can't go into this blind. Jonathan nodded. I'll start gathering data. We'll need everything, every bit of computational power we can throw at this. Elon glanced at Emily. And you? She hesitated. I'll prepare the team. If this thing wants to make contact, we need to be ready. We don't know what kind of presence we're dealing with. A heavy silence followed as they each absorbed the weight of their decision. The multiverse was vast. They had only just begun to understand its true nature. But now, they were about to take another step, a leap into the unknown. Over the next few days, Elon, Emily, and Jonathan worked tirelessly. Every corner of SpaceX was now a hub of frantic activity. Elon had reached out to his most trusted scientists, physicists, and even theoretical cosmologists, all of whom had seen the impossible firsthand in the wake of the breach. They were assembling teams, running simulations, scanning every bit of data they could get their hands on. The transmission had stopped, but the pull of its resonance remained. Elon couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something far bigger than they could fully understand. He was staring at the console again, his mind swimming with theories, when Emily entered the room, holding a tablet. Her face was unreadable, but Elon could see the faint tremble in her hands. Elon, she said, her voice steady, but there was an edge to it. You need to see this. He turned, walking toward her. On the screen, the latest data analysis flashed before him. The code they had been deciphering for days had shifted. The patterns were changing again, adapting in real time. Elon trailed off, staring at the tablet. It's evolving. Not just evolving, Emily corrected. It's responding. Jonathan appeared behind them, his face pale. We've been trying to trace the source of the signal, but, he paused, his eyes widening. We're not just tracing the signal. We're in it. The transmission is folding back on itself. It's connected to us, Elon. To our presence. Elon felt his heart race. Connected? How? Jonathan shook his head, clearly as confused as Elon. I'm not sure. It's like we're becoming part of the transmission itself. The signal is resonating with something deep inside us. The implications were mind-bending. The transmission, the resonance, the call. It wasn't just a message from beyond. It was inviting them. It was calling to them in ways they couldn't fully explain. But the connection was undeniable. Elon's breath caught in his throat. We're not just receivers anymore. We're transmitters. Whatever this thing is, it's making us a part of it. Emily's face paled. You're saying it's merging with us? I think it already has, Elon replied quietly. This isn't just about understanding the signal. It's about becoming part of the transmission itself. We're already in it. The weight of the words settled over them, and for the first time, the true enormity of their situation began to sink in. They had crossed into something far greater than their understanding, and now, the multiverse was calling them into its fold. But was this a call to destiny or to destruction? Elon stood before the massive holographic screen in the heart of SpaceX's command center, eyes fixed on the pulsing code that had begun to envelop them. The transmission had shifted once again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just a signal anymore. It was a presence. It was like the very fabric of reality itself had wrapped around them, tightening with every passing second. The strange resonance they had felt earlier had escalated into something almost tangible, as if the entire room was vibrating with energy. His mind raced, a flurry of conflicting thoughts and emotions whirling inside him. The team had been working non-stop to understand what was happening, but with every breakthrough, the situation seemed to become more incomprehensible. The message, once a simple call, had evolved into a web of interwoven patterns, cryptic symbols, and shifting frequencies. But one thing was clear. It was responding to them. It was aware of them. Elon felt a chill run down his spine. He had once believed in the power of human ingenuity, that humanity could solve anything, conquer any challenge. But this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Is everyone ready? Elon asked, turning to Emily and Jonathan, who had been working tirelessly alongside him. The decision they had made, to follow the signal, to trace its source, had brought them to this precipice. But now, standing on the edge, Elon wasn't so sure. Was it possible to step back now? Was there a way to untangle themselves from this call before it consumed them? Emily nodded, her face drawn with exhaustion but resolute. We've done everything we can here. The data's feeding through, and we're as prepared as we'll ever be. But Elon, I'm still not sure what we're walking into. The deeper we go into this code, the more I feel connected to it, like it's changing us. Not just mentally, but physically. I can feel it in my bones. Elon met her gaze, and for a moment, they shared an unspoken understanding. There was no turning back. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Jonathan, standing a few feet away, tapped on a console and looked up at them. His eyes were wide, filled with both awe and fear. Elon, the signal has stabilized. But it's not just static anymore. It's like the transmission itself is a bridge, a gateway. It's trying to pull us in. Pull us in? Elon repeated, a sinking feeling settling in his gut. Jonathan nodded grimly. I'm not saying it's like a wormhole or anything like that. But the resonance, it's not just a frequency. It's like a gravitational pull. The more we interact with the signal, the stronger it becomes. And it's directing us towards something. It's like it's opening a door. The hairs on the back of Elon's neck stood up. A door. They had known for a long time that the signal was more than just a message. It was an invitation. An invitation to the unknown, to something that could change the very foundation of reality itself. But now, it felt less like an invitation and more like a summons. A pull they couldn't resist. Elon, Emily said, her voice trembling slightly, we have no idea what's on the other side of this. We're talking about opening a door to the multiverse. There are infinite possibilities, infinite realities. Who knows what could come through? Elon's mind flashed to the warning they had received earlier. We are watching. We are waiting. Your time is coming. The message had haunted him ever since. It had been a promise and a threat all at once. But there was no turning back. Not now. They had already crossed into the unknown, and the multiverse had taken notice. The door, once cracked open, was now wide enough to step through. We've already stepped through, Elon said quietly. The breach, the transmission, it's all part of the same thing. We can't walk away from this now. The only way forward is through it. We're going to follow the signal to its source. Emily and Jonathan exchanged a look, and despite the fear in their eyes, they nodded. They were in this together, and there was no other option. It was time to face whatever was on the other side. The room hummed with activity as Elon and his team prepared the final steps for what they were about to do. They had constructed an array of specialized equipment designed to interface directly with the signal, using quantum computing algorithms to amplify its frequency. This technology, they hoped, would allow them to tap directly into the energy field that had been radiating from the transmission. But as the final systems were brought online, a sense of unease settled over them. Emily stood beside Elon, watching as the holographic displays flickered to life. The symbols from the transmission had started to converge, creating a swirling vortex of light and energy in the center of the room. It was beautiful in a way, strange and alien, but undeniably mesmerizing. The air crackled with static electricity, and Elon could feel his heart race as the room seemed to pulse in rhythm with the energy. This is it, Jonathan said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the equipment. We're opening the door. Elon didn't speak. He couldn't. The enormity of what they were about to do was finally sinking in. A part of him wanted to stop, to turn off the equipment and walk away from it all. But deep down, he knew that they were already too far gone. The multiverse wasn't just a theory anymore. It was real, and it was calling them. With a final, steadying breath, Elon pressed the activation key. For a moment, nothing happened. The lights flickered, and the hum of the machinery seemed to fade. Then, slowly, the vortex in the center of the room began to intensify. The symbols on the screen blurred, spinning faster and faster, until they became a single, blinding point of light. And then, in an instant, the room was plunged into darkness. When the lights flickered back on, the world had changed. Elon blinked, disoriented. For a moment, he thought he had lost his sense of space and time. The room was still the same, SpaceX's command center, but everything felt different. The walls seemed to shimmer, like the very fabric of the building had been altered. He turned to Emily and Jonathan, but they were no longer standing beside him. In their place stood something else. Figures cloaked in shadows, indistinct but unmistakably other. There was a presence here, a weight, a vastness, that had not been there before. Elon's heart raced. "Emily? Jonathan?" he called, but his voice sounded distant, as if it had been swallowed by the void. A low, rumbling hum filled the air, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. And then, a voice, soft but powerful, echoed through the room. "Welcome to the infinite." The voice was both distant and immediate, as though it was coming from the very air around them. Elon's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't sure if he was hearing it with his ears or feeling it in his mind. And then the presence in the room shifted. It wasn't just a voice. It was a being, something vast, something ancient, and it was looking at them. "You have come far," it said, its voice 1,000 voices all at once. But the true test is just beginning. Elon's legs trembled beneath him as the reality around them warped, and he realized, too late, that they had not just opened a door. They had crossed into something else entirely, something that wasn't bound by time or space. And they were no longer just observers. They were participants in a game whose rules had yet to be revealed. The room around them was no longer the command center of SpaceX. The walls, once sleek, sterile, and familiar, now seemed to stretch and distort, shifting like liquid glass. The hum of the machinery had faded, replaced by a low, almost imperceptible vibration that resonated deep within Elon's chest. It was as though the very air was alive, infused with energy beyond his comprehension. "Emily?" Elon called again, his voice crackling with uncertainty. But the words barely escaped his lips before they were absorbed into the vast silence. Before him stood figures, tall and shadowed, their forms constantly shifting, as if they were made of smoke or light, flickering in and out of existence. They were not human, yet there was something strangely familiar about them. They didn't speak, but there was a palpable presence that emanated from them, a sense of being observed, scrutinized. The voice from earlier echoed again in his mind, but now it was clearer, sharper, more defined. "You have come far," it said, its tone resonating deeply, like a whisper that cut through time itself. "But you have not yet seen. You have only touched the edge of what lies beyond." Elon's breath caught in his throat. It felt as if the very fabric of reality had been peeled away to reveal a vast, infinite expanse, something that defied the laws of physics, something that existed beyond the boundaries of space and time. And in the center of this vastness, the figures loomed like sentinels, watching. "Where are we?" Elon finally whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was asking the figures or himself. "What is this place?" The figure closest to him, a silhouette of shifting light, raised what seemed like an arm, though it was unclear if it had a form at all. It extended toward him, and a flood of images surged into his mind. They were flashes, quick, disorienting, and yet they felt like memories. But they weren't his. The images were of worlds, of civilizations that spanned across dimensions, of energy fields that seemed to hum with life, of vast machines that bent space and time. And in the midst of it all, a single thread, glowing, delicate, yet impossibly strong, ran through everything. It connected the worlds, the energy, the machines. And then, a voice, softer this time, almost a whisper. You are a part of the thread. You are connected to it, whether you understand it or not. Elon staggered back, his mind spinning. He was no longer sure if what he was experiencing was real, or if it was some kind of projection, a dream, a hallucination. He wanted to question, to understand, but words failed him. The flood of visions had overwhelmed him. Beside him, Emily and Jonathan were no longer the people he knew. Their eyes were wide, their faces ashen. They were feeling it too, the overwhelming surge of energy, the flood of impossible knowledge. What is this? Jonathan finally managed, his voice trembling. What is happening to us? The voice answered, and this time it sounded as though it came from inside his very mind, echoing through his thoughts. It is the essence of the infinite, the connection between all things. You have touched the heart of the multiverse. You have been chosen. Chosen? Emily repeated, her voice breaking through the haze. What do you mean we've been chosen? You have reached the threshold, the voice responded, its tone almost affectionate, yet distant. The threads of fate are weaving, and you are now a part of that weave. The journey has begun. The question is not what you have learned, but what you will do with it. Elon's mind raced. The knowledge that had flooded his senses only moments ago, the impossibility of it all, was still swirling in his mind. The thread. The idea that they were connected to something far greater, far older than their understanding. But what did it mean? What was the purpose of all of this? The figures began to move, their forms shifting in ways that defied any logical explanation. They were not walking, not floating, but shifting through the space around them, bending and twisting reality with each motion. Elon instinctively stepped back, but his feet felt heavy, as if the very air around him was pulling at him, holding him in place. What will you do? The voice repeated, its tone now laced with an edge of finality. You are not mere spectators. You are not simply observers of the multiverse. You are participants. The choice is yours. Suddenly, the room, no, the entire space, seemed to ripple, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a single drop. Reality itself fractured, and Elon was swept into another vision. They were no longer in the control room. Instead, Elon found himself standing on a vast, barren plain under an alien sky. The stars above were not the ones he knew. They were different, brighter, larger, more numerous. The horizon stretched endlessly, and in the distance, Elon saw what looked like a towering city, its structures impossibly tall and shaped like something from a dream. But the city was fading, its light flickering, as if it were dying, or had already died. What is this? Elon asked, turning to Emily and Jonathan. But their faces were no longer there. He was alone. This is one possibility, the voice intoned. This is one future, one thread of the weave. It is the result of a choice made long ago. The end of a journey. Elon stared at the decaying city in the distance. The thought that they could be the cause of this, a future where everything had unraveled, sent a shiver through him. You can change this, the voice said. The threads are not set. The future is not written. You are not bound by destiny. You are the weavers of your own fate. The vision shifted again, and this time, Elon saw another world. This one was vibrant, teeming with life. Its cities were alive with energy, glowing with advanced technology, yet in perfect harmony with nature. People, alien, human, and hybrid, walked the streets, sharing knowledge, living in peace. The very air seemed alive with possibilities. This is another possibility, the voice said. A different future, a different thread. But it is just as fragile. Elon's head spun. These visions, these choices, they weren't just hypothetical. They were real. Or they could be. They were the potential futures, the paths that lay before them. The multiverse was not a passive thing. It was a living, breathing entity that was constantly shifting, constantly changing, and they had been given the power to shape it. The figures surrounding him began to coalesce, their forms becoming clearer, more distinct. One of them, tall and ethereal, stepped forward. It raised a hand, and a ripple of light shot through the air. The world around them began to stabilize. "You are not alone in this journey," the figure said, its voice resonating within Elon's mind. "But you must decide, and you must choose wisely. The path you take will shape the multiverse, and you will be the architects of what comes." Elon felt a rush of emotions: fear, awe, hope, and a strange sense of responsibility. He had once thought of himself as a creator, a pioneer, someone who shaped the future. But this was something else entirely. The fate of countless realities rested in his hands. The weight of that realization was almost too much to bear. But in that moment, one thought became clear. They weren't just learning about the multiverse anymore. They were a part of it. And the question wasn't whether they would change the multiverse, it was how.